to the whoop-de-wop.
Drifting off and getting
We're
away from
going to
that.
keep going over it, and I'm going to keep twisting your words
Whoop-de-wop
to remind everybody
is
Oh
a
we
my
don't owe
God.
white people. We do not owe white people
Whoop-de-wop.
shit.
is a place.
I run the risk,
Whoop-de-wop.
and it's not my channel, so I will just drop this fucking link.
Just curious. You know the
Yo,
who's your
hand me the whoop-de-wop.
Well, I know it's an Indiana thing.
Yo, you got
Yeah,
some
but do
money?
you know
We're
what
going
Hoosier
to the
is?
whoop-de-wop.
I actually don't.
Okay.
Yo,
Got
we
something to do
can
with things.
throw some cool
And
whoop-de-wops.
from a Hoosier, you're going to get certain things that are going to happen. And
Well, I
walk
do
down
know
the
at one
coast,
point
though, go
Indiana
grab that
was
shit
like
right
the
quick.
center of the
She
clan.
was like, cool. And she already know to get my dough. So,
just an American. I'm here as a black man who is tired of watching weaponized statistics flatten our humanity and justify fear. I'm not making this video to beg anyone to see black men and women as safe or to make you feel comfortable. I'm making this video so the facts are on the record. You can believe whatever you want about us, but what you can't do is hide behind junk statistics and fear scripts. And to the pundits who walk into black spaces with a pocket full of viral numbers and a camera, do your homework. Learn the difference between arrests and convictions, between solved and unsolved, between intraracial and interracial. If you won't, expect a response, expect receipts, expect your fatigue narrative to face a mirror. Because if cherry picking is your weapon, it cuts both ways. We're done debating propaganda. We're here to teach people how to read the numbers for themselves so they can stop being played, especially in the black community. I'll extend grace for ignorance if you simply haven't had time to look up the data. But once the receipts are on the table and you keep defending a falsehood, that's not ignorance anymore. That's a choice. Today, we're going to fact check a set of viral claims featured by Steven Crowder and echoed across social media. And we're going to teach you all how to read crime data so you never get hustled by them again. And let me say this as loudly as possible. One loss of life is too many. Nothing here minimizes harm. This is about how numbers are used to tell a dishonest story. Now, let's talk about where that 13%, 50% stat really comes from. The number, 13% of the population committing 50% of the murders, has been repeated so often that it feels factual. But the truth is simpler and more responsible. It is a misreading of law enforcement reporting tables. The figure comes from the FBI's Uniform Crime Report.
Welcome to Stanley versus the World, everybody. Please hit the like button as you file in. And if you're new here, please subscribe. No, I think a medium man is going to go a little bit where I wouldn't go. He needs, in my opinion, needs to start with, well, maybe he said it. I think he is acting like Steven Crowder doesn't understand what Steven Crowder is doing. Okay, Steven Crowder, Be Brave, people like that think, well, first off, they racialize crime. Okay, it's like 12-something% of the U.S. population identifies as Black American. They basically want to make all Black Americans responsible for the crime. It's not an oversight on their part. You've heard Brave make this crazy claim that 70% of the Black population in America is out of their mind because they ignore or even actively encourage the 3% or whatever the number is of Black Americans who commit crime, as if we're accessories to the crime. And it's basically naked racism. I've said it before. The reason Black crime, if we want to call it Black crime, the reason it goes unsolved is anyone who is not a Black American feels it's not their problem. As if Black Americans control police forces, education, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing they want to do is dodge. Okay, well, these big cities are run by Black Americans. Well, again, they want to basically racialize crime. They want to racialize these problems, and they don't seem to understand that we all are riding on the same sinking ship. Racializing everything basically kicks the can down the road, leaves it to people who may not even have the resources or maybe even the know-how. So it's intentional. It's not like Steven Crowder's ignorant, though, I don't think he's particularly bright, but he knows what he's doing.
Reports and supplemental homicide reports.
Hello.
What's
My
up,
name is Tim
Tanika? What's up,
Ferguson,
J-Dub?
Assistant Director of the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division. The FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program, or UCR program, is proud to release
Have you
monthly
been
crime
missing
data
him,
on the
J-Dub?
FBI's Crime Data Explorer, also known
Hopefully
as the CDE.
he's okay.
You will no longer have to wait 1 year to view updated data. The FBI's UCR program will publish data received from participating law enforcement agencies every month. This includes data updates and revisions submitted by agencies. These changes allow you to view timely crime data and support law enforcement in data-driven decision-making. On the other hand, the annual publication uses reported data and standard estimation procedures to provide a view of all agencies across the country. Because not all law enforcement agencies submit a complete 12 months of data, the FBI includes reported data and standard estimated data for a national presentation of crime in the annual report. It uses the reported data from agencies that submit 12 months of data and then estimates the amount of crime for any agency that does not submit 12 complete months of data. Agencies that submit 3 to 11 months of crime data have their missing months estimated based on the data they have provided. Agencies submitting less than 3 months of data are estimated by using the data from agencies in the state that are similar in population size and geographic location and are covered by the same type of police agency, such as a local police department or sheriff's office. Thus, estimates look at 12 months of data for all agencies across the country. It is important to understand the trend on the CDE relies solely on reported data, while the annual publication uses estimations to account for the entire country. As more agencies voluntarily submit their completed monthly data, any difference between the two trends will diminish. The FBI's UCR program is grateful to all agencies that voluntarily provide their data to us. Their participation allows our annual report to cover more than 94% of the population of the United States.
Those documents show arrests and known offenders in solved cases, not total crimes, not convictions, and certainly not racial predisposition.
When people quote the FBI's national crime numbers, they rarely explain how those numbers are actually collected. In the United States, there are about 18,000 law enforcement agencies. Roughly 16,300 of them are enrolled in the FBI's crime reporting system, but only about 85% actually submit usable data. That means around 15% of agencies, mostly small rural departments that serve majority white areas, do not report at all. Even though the agencies that do report cover roughly 94% of the U.S. population, the coverage is not even. Urban departments, which serve larger Black populations, report far more completely and consistently than suburban or rural departments, which are overwhelmingly white and underreported. So when you hear statistics claiming that Black men commit half of all homicides, remember, those figures are built primarily from cities that send their data, not from the rural white jurisdictions that often don't. In other words, the difference isn't in behavior, it's in who gets counted. And here's the second layer of misunderstanding. The FBI doesn't track convictions, it only tracks arrests and reported incidents. Once someone is arrested or labeled a known offender, that number goes into the database, even if the case is later dropped or the person is proven innocent. The Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Statistics handle conviction data separately, and those numbers are never the same. So when a pundit says Black men commit 50% of homicides, they're really citing arrest data from the agencies that reported, not confirmed convictions nationwide. It's not a measure of guilt, it's a measure of who gets policed, who gets arrested, and which agencies actually send their numbers to Washington.
Each year, roughly half of the United States homicides remain unsolved. And in those unsolved cases, the offender's race is unknown. Yet commentators compare only the solved portion to the entire U.S. population. That's invalid. Solved cases reflect where law enforcement resources and attention are concentrated, primarily in urban centers with large Black populations. This creates what criminologists call a clearance bias. It means the visible share of Black arrests is inflated by geography and policing intensity, not by behavior. That is how statistical artifact evolves into national talking points. Let's correct the record. The population reality is that Black men make up approximately 7 to 7.5% of the United States population, not 13%. An arrest is an allegation, not a verdict. And urban departments have higher clearance rates because they receive more resources and report data more consistently. Roughly 80% of white victims are harmed by white offenders.
And I want to make the point. I don't know how many times I've heard, and Be Brave tends to be the most virulent of these people, so he's always at top of mind, and hopefully he's okay. He will hear, why do 13% or whatever the number is commit murders? The FBI numbers, he's absolutely right. Media Man is absolutely right. Arrested for murder is not the same thing as commit murder. That's the difference between an arrest and a conviction. And again, a lot of murders go unsolved. There's and essentially, it's a real sloppy argument and just a nakedly racist argument for people who, I mean, if you're going to do this, at least the devil is in the details. Let people know that, hey, these are down and dirty numbers. There's a lot of inference involved in these numbers. I think it is correct to say, well, so many of a demographic are arrested for murder. It stands to reason that most of them are committed by that number. But people, if you start expressing these statements this way, it takes a whole lot of starch out of an argument. It casts a little doubt. These numbers are fuzzy, but racists don't. Racists like Be Brave aren't known for their nuance. I'll just put it that way, or their ability to either recognize or express nuance. So I'll leave it at that. But these numbers that people want to get all hot and heavy over are very fuzzy numbers.
Offenders. About 90% of Black victims are harmed by.
How are you,
offenders.
SB?
So when commentators imply that Black men are systemically targeting white citizens,
white people are 12 times as likely to be killed by a Black person than the other way around. I'm just going to shoot you straight. It's not even close.
they are not citing evidence. They are perpetuating a myth.
Straight from the FBI's own expanded homicide data, Table 6 for 2022. Out of all recorded homicides that year, there were 504 white victims killed by Black offenders, and 114 Black victims killed by white offenders.
Okay, I also, and I'm sure Media Man will do this, the overwhelming number of violent crimes are race on race, white on white, Black on Black. I don't know where people get the idea that, Blacks pose this huge threat to whites. They need to fear their own. And the other thing, it seems of an inordinate number of these violent crimes committed by white males are, and I'm I'm just going off memory. I could be wrong, but a lot of these crimes happen like within the home. And Be Brave actually talks about this. Like husbands killing wives and kids and stuff like that. I never hear anybody talk about that in actually. Well, Be Brave's thing is at least it's not happening in public, and when he says that, I can't help but laugh. In my opinion, it's worse. Killing your family members, your schoolmates.
That's a difference of about 4.4 times, not 12. And here's what Crowder leaves out entirely. More than 80% of all murders
all is
are
good here,
interracial.
SB.
That means most white people are killed by other white people, and most black people are killed by other black people. So the 12 times talking point isn't just wrong. It's designed to inflame racial fear instead of addressing violence where it actually happens, within communities themselves. Don't let people twist the numbers. The facts are public, and they tell a very different story.
And to go a little further, there are about 23.2 million black men and boys in the United States. Even if every homicide in a given year were committed by black men, which is false, it would still represent less than 0.1% of the black male population. Among men aged 18 to 34, the demographic most associated with violence, fewer than 0.3% commit a homicide in the year. That means 99.7% do not. And within that number, those are fathers, service members, entrepreneurs, professionals, married men, and the majority rarely depicted when the narrative turns to crime. So again, violence is not racial, it is demographic. Across every ethnic group, offending rates peak among young men in their late teens and 20s. When we control for age, poverty, and neighborhood conditions, racial disparities shrink dramatically. What many people call race in these discussions is often just a proxy for exposure to disadvantage. And let's not forget, according to the National Registry of Exonerations, black defendants account for more than half of all homicide exonerations in the United States. Even with the subset of people arrested, many were later proven innocent. Those arrests remain in the black offender column of public debate. But the truth is more complex. If a dataset cannot distinguish between guilt and wrongful conviction, it cannot serve as moral evidence.
And then you look at the average amount of times that someone in this country is arrested before they're brought in for killing, charged with murder. Do you know how many times they're arrested on average before they murder? 11 times.
The average murderer's been arrested 11 times before killing someone. That sounds shocking until you check the actual source. That number didn't come from national data at all. It came from Washington, D.C.'s police chief, Robert Conti, who said the average homicide suspect in D.C. had been arrested about 11 times.
We need to keep violent people in jail. Right now, the average homicide suspect has been arrested 11 times prior to them committing a homicide. That is a problem. That is a problem.
That's a local statistic, not a national one. The Bureau of Justice Statistics national data tells a different story. In its Recidivism 2012 update, the median number of prior arrests for all offenders was 9, and that includes every type of crime, not just murder. So when Crowder says the average murderer across America has 11 arrests, that's false. He took a city-level talking point and turned it into a national scare line. The truth? There's no federal data showing that number. Always check the source, because context changes everything.
So if you find yourself asking, why does this myth persist? Because fear sells. Fear drives engagement, engagement drives profit, and profit sustains prejudice. If you convince a nation that one group is inherently dangerous and you can justify surveillance, over-policing, and discrimination as public safety, that is not data, it is deflection.
And our system, 3 strikes in California, right? That was a 3-strike policy. The reason that was changed, they said it was racist. Crime went down in black communities 30%.
Stephen Crowder claimed that California's 3 strikes law reduced crime in black communities by 30%. That number is not a measured outcome. It came from a 1994 Rand Corporation projection made before the law was even enforced. Rand's researchers modeled a possible statewide drop of 22 to 34% if the policy were applied perfectly, but real data never matched that forecast. Between 1995 and 1998, California's overall crime rate fell roughly 10%, similar to the national decline that happened everywhere during the same years. Later analyses, including the University of California, Berkeley Punishment and Democracy Study, and reports from the California Legislative Analyst's Office, 2005, found no independent and 30% reduction linked specifically to the law itself. So Crowder's statement confuses a projection with an outcome and inflates the impact by about 3 times.
So now that we've examined how selective statistics are used to portray black men as inherently violent, in Act 2, we turn the mirror around. Because if you insist on calling this black fatigue, then we also must speak honestly about white fatigue, a reality visible in the very data you ignore. Because if you insist on cherry picking individual cases to generalize about an entire group, we can play the same game. And when we do, it becomes clear that what they call black fatigue might just be a projection in order to hide white fatigue. Because the overwhelming share of America's most infamous and most deadly violent offenders, the names etched into the nation's darkest moments, were not black at all. They were white men.
Ted Bundy, executed 1989, charismatic, manipulative, deadly. Ted Bundy confessed to murdering dozens of women across multiple states before his execution in 1989, a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. John Wayne Gacy, executed 1994, the so-called killer clown. John Wayne Gacy murdered and buried 33 boys and young men beneath his suburban Chicago home. Executed in 1994, one of America's most horrifying cases. Jeffrey Dahmer, sentenced 1992, the Milwaukee Cannibal. Jeffrey Dahmer murdered and dismembered 17 men and boys, keeping trophies from his victims. His crimes shook the nation to its core. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, convicted 2003, known for targeting vulnerable women. Gary Ridgway confessed to 49 murders, possibly more. He remains one of the most...
I'm going to skip ahead. I think this might be the most important section of this.
Pittsburgh, 2018, at the Tree of Life Synagogue. Robert Bowers carried out an anti-Semitic massacre, killing 11 Jewish worshipers during Saturday service. Patrick Crusius, El Paso, Texas, 2019, targeting Hispanic shoppers at a local Walmart. Patrick Crusius murdered 23 people in one of the deadliest hate crimes in U.S. history. Peyton Gendron, Buffalo, New York, 2022, in a live stream racist attack.
Ahead of this
Peyton Gendron killed 10 black Americans. Connor Betts killed 9
entire group, then this will be the story of white fatigue, starring white men. These 12 names alone could paint a picture of white America in crisis. But that would be dishonest, right? Because the crimes of individuals, no matter how horrific, never define a race. And yet, that is precisely what has been done to black men for generations. For decades, America's fascination with serial killers has been dominated by a very specific archetype: white, male, American. From documentaries to Netflix dramas, the image of the serial killer has always reflected that reality because the data supports it. If we use Crowder's same argument, the face of crime logic, these would be the faces of white male pathology. But that argument is absurd because criminality is not racial. It is situational, psychological, and behavioral. That is the exact point.
How did that guy get out after 14 times? George Floyd 9 times. Do you realize 11 times arrested as the average murderer?
And you got
Stephen Crowder correctly noted that George Floyd had 9 arrests between 1997 and 2007. That's verified in Houston court records and in a 2020 USA Today fact check. But citing a person's old record in a conversation about national crime rates or policing bias is a distraction, not data. Those arrests have nothing to do with how force was used during his encounter in 2020, and they tell us nothing about broader racial crime statistics. It's accurate biographically, but irrelevant analytically, a classic example of using one man's history to avoid discussing systemic patterns.
Selective storytelling distorts the truth. If we extend the same selective logic to sexual offenses and crimes against minors, the trend remains the same. The most infamous and institutionally protected offenders in recent American history were overwhelmingly white and male. Larry Nassar, former USA gymnastics doctor, sentenced to effectively life in prison for sexually abusing hundreds of young athletes. Jerry Sandusky, former Penn State assistant coach, convicted in 2012 of serial child abuse spanning over a decade. Jeffrey Epstein, financier and convicted sexual predator, responsible for the trafficking and abuse of underage girls. Institutional scandals, Catholic clergy abuse investigations, and Boy Scouts of America lawsuits revealed decades of widespread sexual exploitation, often involving white male perpetrators in positions of authority. And according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, over 77% of federal defendants in child sexual exploitation cases were white men. Bureau of Justice Statistics confirms that most sexual assaults in the United States are intraracial, meaning white women are most often victimized by white men and black women are most often victimized by black men.
Yeah, again, I'm going to skip ahead. The way he sectioned this off isn't quite accurate. So I'm having a hunt the points that I think, this is a rather long video and I don't want to watch the whole thing. So right here, he's going to talk about, I think, media double standards, which I agree with. What he was trying to get at in this current section is fact checking these people like Steven Crowder who just spout out statistics. So let's hop ahead.
0.01%. So his findings come from less than 0.1% of U.S. jurisdictions. That's why many researchers and journalists clarify that Fryer's no racial bias in shootings result is not nationally representative. His data are highly localized, drawn from a handful of departments willing to share data, not from
Oh, they're talking about Roland Fryer
nationwide. So when people quote Fryer to say there's no bias or repeat Crowder's 18 times claim, they're spreading a complete internet misquote based on a study that never claimed to represent the entire country.
So again, let me go over the empirical facts. Black men comprise about 7% of the United States population, not 13%. Over 99% of black men will never commit a homicide. Most violent crime in America is intraracial. People are harmed by those they know and live near.
Just need you to kind of and Steve, when I say this, it's not a challenge, but I got to ask you, you got to tell me these sources where you're getting this 12 times more likely a black man killing a white person. I got to know that, not because it's contradictory, but because I like to have facts. Give me the source.
I'll give them to you. Yeah, when we do it, we always give a QR code where you can see all of them. These are coming from either the FBI or DOJ.
You say
that statement is a lie, and the proof comes directly from his own source. Under his video, Crowder links to an article titled Ben Shapiro, The Left's Favorite Lie, Widespread White on Black Violence, published in the Dispatch, April 21st, 2023. That article cites the 2019 FBI expanded homicide data, and that's the exact source Crowder is referencing. Now here's what that FBI data actually says. In 2019, there were 3,299 white murder victims, and 566, about 17%, were killed by black offenders. That same year, there were 20,906 black murder victims, and 246, about 8%, were killed by white offenders. So when you compare those numbers, that's roughly a 2.3 to 1 difference, not 12. Crowder and Shapiro both took the same 2019 FBI table, twisted it, and presented it as if white people are under siege from black violence. That's not just misleading, that's misquoting federal data. And here's the context.
Oh, it's dishonest.
According to the same FBI report, more than 80% of all homicides in America are intraracial. That means most white victims are killed by white offenders, and most black victims are killed by black offenders.
What's up,
Crime happens within
CKJ3?
communities, not because of race,
What's up, Brian
but because
Nichols?
of proximity and environment.
White
So let's be
Americans.
clear, this isn't about
Not
defending
sure
one
what
group over another.
what are you trying to
about
say there,
defending the
Brian?
truth.
I think I
Crowder's
know what you're
12
trying to
times
say,
claim
but
is
can
a
you
lie.
clarify?
And the
all of
FBI
it?
data from 2019, the very link he shared, proves it. If we're going to talk about crime and race in America, we owe people honesty, not headlines designed to divide.
Mass shootings and serial killings are disproportionately committed by white men when measured by per capita impact, scale, and fatality counts. Black defendants represent over half of all homicide exonerations, showing that arrest share exaggerates true offending share. Socioeconomic conditions, not race, are the dominant predictor of violent crime. When you understand these facts, the black crime narrative collapses because it was never about data. It was about maintaining a sense of moral superiority through select.
Boom. Absolutely. It's basically racists like Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, et al., Charlie Kirk, taking the numbers. And a lot of times these, and this isn't just the Charlie Kirks of the world, people across the board, they depend on their audiences either not caring, they're devoted fans, or they're just too busy with their everyday lives to dig deeper than what their trusted, alternate media source. They basically expect Charlie Kirk to do the research and be correct. And he's just basically throughout his career and others, Steven Crowder, even a Be Brave, on a very, 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 very small scale. They just depend on their audience being either blindly, they depend on blind allegiance, or people just being too busy to, dig into the numbers for themselves. And it's not like it's a new problem. It's always been this way in United States history. So I think Medium Man is actually doing a great service here, kind of level setting all these people. And he's helping, people like me build better arguments.
Collective reporting. Why does this imbalance persist? Because fear generates profit. Media outlets know that a story about a black suspect sells better than the one about systemic failure or a white perpetrator. Political commentators understand that the easiest way to mobilize their base is to manufacture danger. Black crime is not a data trend, it's a business model. The truth is this: violence in America is a human problem, not a racial one. And the responsible way to discuss it is by acknowledging the full picture, not just a convenient slice. If we are serious about addressing crime, we need policies rooted in prevention, not prejudice. We need to confront poverty, trauma, lack of education, and the availability of illegal weapons. We need evidence-based strategies, not racially coded sound bites. When we strip the propaganda away, the truth is simple. No race owns crime, no race owns virtue, and no community benefits from fear as its framework. So when someone says black fatigue, ask them exactly what they're tired of. Because if it's the data...
And I want to add to that, racializing crime, which is really not adding, it's just kind of a corollary to it. That's why crime doesn't get solved in the right ways. We racialize it.
They want, we have it. If it's context they need, we brought it. And if it's honesty they're afraid of, then maybe that's the fatigue they should be addressing. And just in case you didn't hear me in the beginning, this message is not made to comfort or to appease. It is made to clarify. I am not asking anyone to stop being afraid. Fear is human. I'm asking you to understand what you fear and why. If the data makes you feel uncomfortable, good. That means you're learning. If evidence challenges your assumptions, good. That means you're growing. The real fatigue isn't racial, it's intellectual. I'm tired of people mistaking emotion for evidence and politics for proof. So from this point forward, when someone says black fatigue, remember what you learned here, because the truth has receipts, and now so do we. And we understand that white fatigue is real. So now that I've dismantled the myths and exposed the selective storytelling, it's time to talk about what comes next. Because debunking misinformation isn't the destination. It's the starting line for something bigger: data literacy, social accountability, and public renewal. So if we want to have honest conversations about safety and justice, we need to start by teaching people a statistic without context is a headline waiting to be misused. Here's how to approach data like an informed citizen. Know your source. Use the FBI's Crime Data Explorer, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and peer-reviewed research, not social media screenshots. Understand the difference between arrests and convictions. An arrest is a moment. A conviction is a conclusion. They are not interchangeable. Account for unsolved cases. You can't build racial claims on incomplete data. Unknown offenders are a statistical void. and they're not neutral. Distinguish intra-racial from interracial patterns. Most violent crime happens within communities, not across them. Geography, not genetics, drives proximity. Examine socioeconomic context. Poverty, unemployment, and education gaps are far better predictors of violence than skin color will ever be. Look for trend lines, not headlines. A one-year spike means nothing without the trajectory. Data literacy begins with time, not Twitter or X. When you as citizens understand these rules, misinformation loses its oxygen. We must rebuild how this nation talks about crime. Instead of assigning moral value to skin tone, we should be studying systems. Why are clearance rates so low in certain regions? Why do homicide investigations in rural counties, often majority white, lag far behind cities in closure? Why are resources distributed unevenly when human life carries the same value everywhere? The answer is not race, it's inequity. Until we confront that truth, we will continue mistaking symptoms for causes. And to the journalists, pundits, and creators, this part is simple. If you have a platform, you have a responsibility. Statistics are not props. They are human lives rendered into numbers. When you choose which stories to tell and which to ignore, you shape public perception. If your coverage reinforces fear rather than understanding, you are not reporting, you are recruiting. And to the audience who consume these stories, skepticism is not cynicism. Ask questions, demand sources, refuse to let outrage replace accuracy. Because democracy is not sustained by feelings, it is sustained by facts. Change doesn't start in the District of Columbia, it starts at the neighborhood level. Every community can take measurable steps to strengthen itself against the narratives that divide us. Education initiatives. Incorporate data literacy and critical thinking workshops in schools, libraries, and community centers. Public health partnerships. Treat violence prevention as health prevention. Address trauma, addiction, and mental health with the same urgency as policing. Economic empowerment. Support entrepreneurship, vocational training, and financial literacy programs that reduce poverty, which is the strongest social determinant of crime. Mentorship and media literacy. Pair young people with mentors who can help them navigate misinformation, stereotypes, and digital manipulation. And lastly, cross-community dialogue. Create spaces where diverse groups can discuss safety and reform grounded in evidence, not emotion. A well-informed public is the strongest defense against propaganda. Accountability must flow in all directions. Yes, individuals who commit crimes must face justice, but so should institutions that manipulate fear for profit. It means holding political influencers responsible when they distort public data for clout. Justice without accountability is theater. Truth without context is propaganda. Our job is to end both. Peace.
CKJ3 is well, that video, let's just say it was brought to you by CKJ3. I'm definitely gonna put this aside for later use. One of the better breakdowns of numbers and narrative. This was excellent. It's probably one of the best pieces I've seen by Medium, man. So shout out to him. So anyway, I have probably more than normal, more than normal number of newspaper articles. So I'm going to try and get through them quickly. Towards the very end, I have a couple. One long piece that's a well, basically it's an opinion piece, a Substack article, which I will probably want to watch or listen to all the way through, because I thought there were a lot of good points in there. You know, I saw that, Fred. Well, per capita, for me, per capita is useful for identifying an acute problem. But, you know, that acute problem doesn't necessarily mean that other types of problems aren't problems. And it's basically just a way to say, hey, it's real bad in your community and it's not as bad in my community. But see, you know, it's kind of in the military. It was, there was a saying when I was in the Navy, real bad and bad There's a threshold, and you can adjust that threshold, either way. That's not the saying actually, but it's like the difference between bad and horrible. The bad is just bad. The bad is better than horrible, but it's still bad. And I agree with using per capita to identify, quote, hotspots. That's what it's useful for. That's pretty much it. The racist obsession with per capita is it justifies their racist attitudes, I guess. But yeah, that dude that's on Fax Chamber, I don't go on Fax Chamber that much these days, except somebody sends me something, you or Anon. But I might have to talk to Anon about this dude. I was thinking it was Templar. This dude's a little out of control. So I think sometimes Anon allows too much. So let's get into some news articles. And again, I'm probably going to breeze through some of them. Government shutdown nears 3-week mark as Senate fails for the 11th time to advance a funding bill. But what's interesting about that is leader of the Senate leader Thune pivots to federal worker pay as a trial balloon. So what he's going to try and do, and I may just let the auto reader read through it. Basically, he wants to try to do like a little. He wants to do a little bill, basically authorizing just payment for the government workers. And I'm not exactly sure, even if Democrats voted for it. I guess what he's trying to do is say, hey, if the government workers can do this, can be paid. You know what? Let's listen to the article, because now that I think about it, I don't see what his end game would be. So let's listen to it. And this is from the Washington Examiner, which I don't use a whole lot. Probably need to use more. But they tend to be really like Fox News in a way. They're not fair and balanced.
Thune pivots to federal worker pay as latest shutdown trial balloon by David Sivak. Senate Majority
Yes,
Leader
it's still
John
shut down.
Oresti, navigating the 4th week of a government shutdown, is not out of play calls yet as he dares Democrats to oppose a bill paying certain federal workers.
Oh,
later
it's
this
a
week.
she?
The
Really?
legislation, expected to receive a vote on Wednesday or Thursday, amounts to a trial balloon meant to test Democrats' commitment to the health care demands at the center of the shutdown fight. They have so far rejected a clean, short-term funding bill 11 times, with just 2 Democrats and 1 independent siding with Republicans to reopen the government. But Thune has begun to get more creative the longer the shutdown lasts, floating narrower pieces of legislation that in any other circumstance would attract broad support. Thune teed up a full-year Pentagon spending bill last week, an olive branch to appropriators who want to resume the appropriations process, while this week's measure would pay accepted federal employees, meaning those forced to work during the shutdown. Democrats blocked an initial vote on the defense bill previously on Thursday, and are likely to do the same on pay for federal workers as they demand that Republicans extend premium Obamacare subsidies in exchange for their support. The resistance has left Washington no closer to resolving a spending battle that began on October 1st, when all federal agencies shuttered for the first time since 2019. The votes have nonetheless applied consistent pressure on a subset of Democrats Thune views as persuadable. He's been stuck at 3 crossover votes, with 8 needed to overcome the Senate's filibuster, but dislodged a 4th, Senator Jean Shaheen, Democrat from New Hampshire, a retiring defense hawk, when the Senate held a procedural vote on the Pentagon bill. She continues to oppose the broader government funding bill, which passed the House a month ago on September 19th. The vote on federal worker pay marks a departure from Thune's earlier shutdown strategy. He initially refused to open the government in a piecemeal fashion, as Republicans viewed the political blowback to missed paychecks as something that would lead Democrats to end their blockade. But the White House has blunted that leverage by diverting unspent funds to keep troops paid and welfare programs afloat. There are still a litany of pressure points, including the Senate staffers who missed their first full paycheck on Monday, but Democrats have shown no indications they will move off their negotiating position, with rank-and-file senators surprising some Republicans who expected a similar outcome as March, when Schumer and 9 other members of his caucus caved to a similar GOP funding bill. Instead, Democrats believe they have staked their fight on strong political ground this time, using an issue such as healthcare that helped them win the midterm elections in 2018. Thune did not wait long before shifting his shutdown strategy. His leadership team began weighing whether to offer Democrats a standalone vote on the expiring Obamacare subsidies around a week after funding lapsed, something Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, rejected as a fig leaf. A few days later came the idea of moving full-year funding bills in the midst of a government shutdown, anchored to the Pentagon funding measure. Still, Republicans have not abandoned their original play, forcing Democrats to vote on the House-passed funding bill almost every day the Senate has been in session this month. The measure failed again on Monday with no change in Democratic support. Thune's strategy stands in contrast to Speaker Mike Johnson Arley, who has kept the House on recess for more than a month, effectively arguing that Republicans did their job and have nothing to discuss until Senate Democrats join them. Johnson said Monday that he would bring the House back if the Senate passed pay for federal workers.
You know, I guess I'll have to dig a little deeper. I don't actually understand why they wouldn't vote for it. The quickest way to lose public support is not vote for people to get their paychecks, especially Senate staffers. And part of the reason I'm sure they're doing this is Senate staffers are not being paid. I guess the senators are, but the Senate staffers are not. So I'll have to figure out why the Democrats would not vote for this. In a way, it's kind of a capitulation. I'll have to do some more research. I don't know why Democrats wouldn't do it. There's some other things I'm sure that I haven't even read the bill that the Senate wants the Democrats or I haven't read the continuing resolution. Maybe that the major pain point is people not getting paid, which the Democrats don't want to capitulate, but you never deny people their paychecks. That's not a good look. So we'll see, and I'll do a little bit more research. This is a victory for the bad guys, MAGA. Trump can deploy National Guard troops to Portland, appeals court says, and it's probably they're gonna probably appeal this to the Supreme Court as well. So this is interesting. This one kind of hurts, to be honest. Part of White House demolished for Trump ballroom construction. This dude is just fucking out of control. I'm like, what the hell is he doing? So he's just gonna, the White House is like a historical landmark, I would think. So he's just in there fucking like destroying it. Look at this. This is like outrageous. Dude, that White House, isn't that kind of a symbol of America?
You're listening to White House begins demolishing East Wing facade to build Trump's ballroom. A news story written by Jonathan Edwards and Dan Diamond and read by an AI-generated voice. Demolition crews on Monday began tearing down part of the White House to build President Donald Trump's long-desired ballroom, despite his pledge that construction of the $250 million addition wouldn't interfere with the existing building. Construction teams were demolishing a portion of the East Wing, with a backhoe ripping through the structure, according to a photo shared with the Washington Post, and two people who witnessed the activity and spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe it. A cluster of people, including members of the Secret Service, stood on the steps of the Treasury Department to watch the construction unfold, said one of the people. Sounds of construction were also audible on the White House campus, although the project was not easily visible to the public given fencing on the grounds. Trump acknowledged the project in remarks Monday afternoon in the White House's East Room, gesturing to the wall behind him. Right on the other side, you have a lot of construction going on, which you might hear periodically, the president said, at an event honoring the Louisiana State University and Louisiana State University at Shreveport.
Hey, Uncle Fatty, there is like some commission or something that handles federal construction, and they're federal, city codes, building permits, they're probably, these federal buildings don't, have their own set of rules, but apparently there is some federal commission that handles federal building construction, but they say, hey, we handle construction, not demolition. So that's how they've gotten around it. This is amazing. But I'm just going to do a stretch. And, though I majored in science, I have a huge penchant for liberal arts. I'm a reader. Literature was my thing when I was young. Now history and, politics are my thing now that I'm older. But if the White House is the people's house, and that is actually, a historical reference, the people's house. This is what Trump is doing to the people. He's basically demolishing and rebuilding, apparently in his own gaudy way. This is symbolic. It's almost like a movie-esque. It's somebody could make a movie or write a novel on this symbolism.
Shreveport baseball teams. He subsequently posted on his Truth Social platform that the much-needed project had begun. For more than 150 years, every president has dreamt about having a ballroom at the White House to accommodate people for grand parties, state visits, etc.
Really?
The president wrote. Democrats panned the project, with California Governor Gavin Newsom and other lawmakers arguing that Trump's priorities and preferences were not aligned with average Americans. Trump's billionaire ballroom. This is a disgrace. Welcome to the second Gilded Age. Representative Darren Soto, Democrat, Florida, wrote on social media. Trump has long touted his plans for a 90,000 square foot structure that would nearly double the footprint of the main building and its east and west wings.
Say 90,000.
He had also suggested that the construction would not affect the existing White House. It won't interfere with the current building. It won't be. It'll be near it but not touching it, and pays total respect to the existing building, which I'm the biggest fan of, Trump said during an executive order signing in July. It's my favorite. It's my favorite place. I love it. A White House official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to describe construction on the ballroom, confirmed that the demolition process on the East Wing began Monday.
2026
Other parts of the project, such as efforts to preserve objects of historical value, have been underway for several weeks, the official said. Officials declined to provide an explanation for Trump's earlier comments that the new construction would not interfere with the existing building. Officials have separately said that the ballroom would replace the East Wing, noting the many changes made to that structure long before Trump's presidency. The East Wing was constructed in 1902 and has been renovated and changed many times, with a second story added in 1942, the White House said in July. The administration also said that it expected construction to begin by September, detailing plans to make some of the most significant changes to the People's House in a century. Trump originally estimated the project would cost $200 million to build, but has since upped that to $250 million. The National Park Service, which manages the White House grounds, did not respond to inquiries about how much of the East Wing would be destroyed. In a 56-page document about maintaining the fundamental character of the White House and the surrounding grounds, the Park Service said in 2014 it would work with presidential administrations, the U.S. Secret Service, and other agencies to ensure both the preservation and use of one of the most recognized houses in the world. The East Wing has traditionally been used by the First Lady and her team. Offices for the president and his top deputies have long been located in the West Wing. Trump last week also touted his planned ballroom during a dinner with executives from the tech, finance, and defense industries, telling them that the project was fully financed after receiving donations as large as $25 million from dozens of companies, including...
Yeah, this is just the People's House. I guess it's going to be the People's House in the tech corporation's ballroom. This is just really disrespectful of American history, in my opinion. So enough of that rot. This is at least this is at least encouraging. All but 2 universities declined that Trump offer of preferential funding. MIT was one of them. My son actually looked at Vanderbilt mainly because they teach their computer stuff in the engineering department. So you have to actually take, some basic engineering courses as well as the computer stuff. But so one of the 2 Vanderbilt signaled it had reservations. I'll keep a look on at Vanderbilt. It's interesting. It's a rather kind of a conservative place, but they've got some historians and stuff that I actually do follow. So let's hear this article. It's fairly short.
All but 2 universities decline a Trump offer of preferential funding. This article is by Alan Blinder and read by an automated voice. 7 of the 9 universities that the White House initially approached about a plan to steer more federal money towards schools aligned with President Trump's priorities have refused to endorse the proposal. On Monday evening, an 8th signaled that it had reservations about it. Only one, the University of Texas, suggested it might be open to signing on quickly. The University of Arizona rejected the Trump administration's compact on Monday, joining Brown University, Dartmouth College, MIT, the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Southern California, and the University of Virginia. Vanderbilt University did not directly express a view about the plan on.
Just a point. Trump is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, so I'd be interested to see if he has some special vendetta for UPenn rejecting it. His very generous offer they can't refuse.
Monday, the deadline the Trump administration initially gave universities for feedback, but its chancellor suggested misgivings about parts of it. The compact includes conditions like agreeing that academic freedom is not absolute and pledging to potentially shut down institutional units that purposefully punish, belittle, and even spark violence against conservative ideas. Although the Trump administration floated the possibility of greater federal funding for schools that endorsed the plan, one university after another said they could not accept the terms. Principles like academic freedom, merit-based research funding, and institutional independence are foundational and must be preserved, the University of Arizona's president, Suresh Garamella, wrote in an open letter on Monday, though he added that some of the White House's ideas deserve thoughtful consideration. Vanderbilt's chancellor, Daniel Diermeier, stopped short of rejecting the proposal and said that the school would share more feedback with the government about the future of higher education. But Dr. Diermeier signaled that Vanderbilt had concerns about the draft the White House circulated this month. Our North Star has always been that academic freedom, free expression, and independence are essential for universities to make their vital and singular contributions to society, Dr. Diermeyer wrote in an open letter, "We also believe that research awards should be made based on merit alone. This merit-based approach has enabled the scholarly and scientific excellence that has driven American health, security, and prosperity for decades. It must be preserved." Asked for comment, the White House pointed to a Monday evening television appearance by May Mailman, a senior advisor leading the Trump strategy, on Fox Business. In the interview, Ms. Mailman said that universities were saying they have various issues, but that's exactly what we asked them for. "We said that by today we wanted to hear your feedback, not because we don't care about it, but because we do care about it." Ms. Mailman was among the administration officials who signed letters this month that told the 9 universities that the proposal was largely in its final form.
Well, like I said, that's kind of a sign of hope. This idea that academic freedom, essentially academic freedom, at least in my mind, is a synonym for First Amendment. The First Amendment is limited, but the First Amendment, to me, they're synonymous. And the government does not control speech. The federal government or any government controls speech. And the government should not be in control of academic freedom, regardless of whether a lot of federal money goes to to universities or not. So let us move on. Yesterday, Australia's president, I think he's a prime minister, met with Trump, and they signed some sort of deal for critical minerals. Let's read this. It says on Monday, U.S. President Donald Trump and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese signed the critical minerals agreement in the White House cabinet room, creating an $8.5 billion pipeline of projects. China announced strict export controls earlier this month, escalating trade tensions as Beijing dominates rare earth refining and the U.S. depends on Chinese imports. The framework commits $3 billion in joint investments over 6 months, including $1 billion immediate financing, while the Export-Import Bank plans $2.2 billion, and the Pentagon backs a gallium refinery. The agreement aims to secure U.S. Australia supply chain security and deepen ties, with Trump pledging to accelerate delivery of 3 Virginia-class submarines before meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping. Longer-term moves include strategic reserve sales and market safeguards as Australia signals willingness to sell shares in a strategic reserve of critical minerals and sets a minimum price floor, positioning itself as one of the few processors of rare earths outside China. Interesting. So this is Trump trying to sidestep China. And I have no idea what gallium is used for. I just know it's an element. Let's see. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about Israel, Gaza. Witkoff Kushner meet with Netanyahu in Israel as clashes test Trump's Gaza peace deal. The vice president also arrived there. And apparently it is fragile. So basically they haven't gone beyond step 1 of the 20 points. And basically I think it's a coin toss whether Trump's this is gonna work or not. I don't have confidence. I hope it does work. I hope Trump does get his peace prize for the sake of the Middle East, but I just don't see it. Israel's fired missiles at Gaza, and Hamas. Oh, and another story. Let's see here. Did I save it? Hold on one sec here. There's some Middle Eastern countries that look like they're getting cold feet at putting troops in Gaza. Damn it, I didn't save that story. I'm getting old. And I can't show that. I'll have to find that story, but there's some Middle Eastern countries that have cold feet at putting troops, I guess as peacekeeping troops in Gaza. So we'll switch gears and go a little bit more domestic stuff. North Carolina counties that busted budgets after Helene still waiting for FEMA to pay them back. And the bottom line is Trump wants to push disaster relief back onto the states. And I haven't been able to figure out why he would want to do that. These natural disasters are like a national problem, in my opinion, not just a state problem.
Think it's the wrong time to buy a new Chevy truck?
Over these
You're listening to North Carolina counties that busted budgets after Helene's still waiting for FEMA to pay them back. A news story written by Brady Dennis, Brianna Sachs, and Kevin Crow, and read by an AI-generated voice. Lynn Austin keeps running the numbers, and they don't look good. Since Hurricane Helene devastated her community in western North Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains, the county government has spent nearly $50 million on cleanup and recovery, while getting reimbursed only $4 million from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. On debris removal alone, Yancey County has racked up about $37 million in bills, with a lot more work still to do. The county's budget for the entire fiscal year, also $37 million. It's a little tight, Austin, the county manager, half joked. More than a year after Helene, Yancey and other storm-battered counties across this region are still waiting for the federal government to make good on its promises to pay back millions upon millions of dollars that local officials have spent or allocated for recovery. The process has been agonizingly slow and unusually complicated, Austin and officials from other counties say. That delay has upended local budgets and hindered reconstruction. And while comparisons can be tricky, North Carolina officials don't know how to reconcile that their state has received less than some of its neighbors in certain types of FEMA aid after Helene. Even though the storm wrecked hundreds of roads and bridges in the Tar Heel state, crippled water systems, and damaged or destroyed more than 73,000 homes. The biggest issue right now is the fact we need more money, said Matt Calabria, the head of the Governor's Recovery Office for Western North Carolina. Recovering from a major disaster takes years at best, and navigating FEMA's bureaucracy has always been arduous. But the Trump administration has instituted new layers of red tape that have made it even harder for communities, especially ones with small staffs and budgets, to recoup the unprecedented sums they have had to spend since Helene. President Donald Trump's expressed desire to get state and local governments to shoulder more responsibility in the wake of a disaster also has heightened concerns about whether the federal government will make good on its promises. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi L. Noem, who oversees FEMA payments, has said the new rules and reviews are intended to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. FEMA closely monitors the Disaster Relief Fund and is prepared to support states with any critical disaster response and recovery needs that exceed their capabilities. FEMA said in a statement to the Post, adding that the fund is not infinite. Like all federal appropriations, the DRF depends on Congress to maintain a healthy balance that allows resources to be managed flexibly and responsibly for immediate response needs. The FEMA statement blamed Democrats for shutting down the government and said before that Noem was driving major reforms to make FEMA more efficient and accelerate the flow of recovery dollars to impacted communities. Not getting reimbursed has left Yancey County and other storm-battered communities in a bind. They have been expecting federal money to pay their contractors
What's up, Richard?
and keep recovery work.
Yeah, that was pretty funny, actually.
They also need to be able to balance
the show
their
title,
books,
or
they risk
the
a hit
one
to their
line
credit ratings with ripple effects for taxpayers. North Carolina's state government has in some cases stepped in to ensure that communities such as Yancey don't go under. But the state, while having been allocated more than $6 billion by various federal...
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into it, but the overarching point is Trump wants to put natural disaster relief onto the states. And I guess this is one other thing I'm going to have to write on my little notebook here to figure out what the logic is. There are times when depending on where the disaster happens, states may not even be able to afford to deal with a natural disaster. And in my mind, as I said, environment, natural disasters, that sort of stuff, that's a national problem. Just going, oh, hey, that's a North Carolina problem. Just that's ridiculous. So let me backtrack a little bit back to the Hamas thing. One thing that I do know, there's a Muslim Brotherhood thing. Hamas does not get along with other other Middle Eastern countries. It even goes back down to something like their form of Islam. And I people have talked to me about it before, and I don't remember all the details. But Palestinians, two things that strike me in this particular article: Palestinians, a history of displacement. Displacement has been a major theme of Palestinian history. In the 1948 war around Israel's creation, an estimated 700,000 Palestinians were expelled or fled from what is now Israel. Palestinians refer to the event as the Nakba, which there are a couple good documentaries on YouTube about the Nakba. It's Arabic for catastrophe. In the 1967 Mideast War, when Israel seized the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, 300,000 more Palestinians fled, mostly to Jordan. And they still have camps there, from what I understand. The refugees and their descendants now number nearly 6 million, most living in camps and communities in the West Bank, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. The diaspora has spread further, with many refugees building lives in Gulf Arab countries or the West. So the other issue, no guarantee of return. And this is basically Middle Eastern countries not wanting to take Palestinian refugees. If you remember, Trump and I think even Netanyahu floated just relocating 2 million or so Palestinians so they could rebuild it. And I'm sure Trump was not joking when he proposed, hey, we could just turn it into a big resort. So these Arab countries are like, hey, you know what, you bring Palestinian refugees into the country, they're going to be here permanently. In that Jordan refugee camp situation that I talked about is a great example. These people are still here that war happened in 1967. And then I didn't find the story, and at this point I won't bother, but troops, other Arab countries sending troops, they don't, there's hesitation, and for obvious reasons. $250,000 ballroom, that's $250 million, not trillion. What's up, Yeti? How you doing? So let's move on. I just think Trump's done a pretty good job of forcing this ceasefire, and neither side's going to be happy with the ceasefire. I just hope it takes. It's a little tenuous, and looks like Trump is doing a full court press, sending the vice president and his son-in-law and Steve Witkoff back. So we'll stay tuned to it. So let's see what is next. let's see, we talked about that. Oh, this is interesting. A pardoned Capitol rioter charged with threatening to kill Hakeem Jeffries at a New York City event this week. So, yeah, a lot of these criminals that are getting pardoned are basically still, kind of, I don't know what you would call them, like political, like, well, let's just call them terrorists. um, and I'll read a little bit of this. Here, let's take this down. So, a pardoned Capitol rioter charged with threatening to kill Hakeem Jeffries at an NYC event this week. I guarantee you, he probably did just an overnight in after he was arrested. So, a pardoned Capitol rioter was arrested last weekend for allegedly threatening to kill House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Court documents obtained by CBS News said Christopher Moynihan was arrested Sunday after saying in text messages that he planned to eliminate Jeffries when the top House Democrat spoke at an event in New York City on Monday. Jeffries spoke at the Economic Club of New York on Monday. Let's see here. Moynihan stated, "Even if I am hated, he must be eliminated. I will kill him for the future." Holy shit. So they've got a picture of Moynihan here, an image of in a prosecutor's sentencing memo for Moynihan shows him entering the Capitol. By the way, I heard some idiot, Blue Jay 666 or 999, whatever the hell, basically saying that these rioters were let in. Well, there are several entry points around the Capitol. It's a pretty large building, and they may have been let in at one of the entrances, but they were also breaking windows and breaching inner sanctums. Once again, people like her, and I don't mean to pick on her, she's a nice woman, I guess, but she's not very knowledgeable. And she's a great example of just speaking on, speaking on shit you haven't, you don't know. She's really bad about that. And if anybody knows her, tell her I said it. She'll expect it. Yeah. Yeah. That, and I do recall they were let into like the one of the, I can't remember whether it was the House floor. They weren't, they were breaching doors and windows and stuff like that. But she just flippantly said, "Oh, well, they were let in," like they were guests. So, oh yeah, Fred, don't start me on that civilized stuff. So anyway, political violence, and this is, he's a J6er. He's not far left. Or anything like that. So North Carolina, the same state that FEMA still needs to help, is trying to give Trump another congressional seat. Talk about people like working against their own best interests. What the hell? So North Carolina lawmakers are set to vote on a redrawn congressional district map to gain another Republican-leaning House seat. The new map moves some Republican-leaning counties like Hyde, Dare, and Pamlico into District 1, while Democratic-leaning counties like Pitt, Lenoir, and they may pronounce it Lenore, and Greene move to District 3. North Carolina is one of 4 states yet to pass a state budget, leaving state employees without pay raises until a new budget is approved. Not sure why that's needs to be a talking point, but I think we just did a story on FEMA still not helping enough or being slow to help Western North Carolina. I think that's where most of the damage was, Asheville and those surrounding areas. And but they're gonna reinforce Republican power. Interesting. So this just came out a few minutes ago. Warner Brothers Discovery says it is considering a sale. The owner of CNN, HBO, and the Warner Brothers movie studio revealed that it has received acquisition interest from multiple suitors. Definitely want to hear this. Consolidating all these media outlets, dude, this is like the worst thing that could be happening at this point in time, where in my opinion I've got something, we'll talk about it later, but in my personal opinion, we're teetering on an authoritarian ledge. They're trying to apparently make us like Hungary.
Warner Brothers Discovery says it is considering a sale. This article is by Benjamin Mullen and Lauren Hirsch and read by an automated voice. Warner Brothers Discovery, the owner of HBO, CNN, and the Warner Brothers movie studio, just hung a for sale sign on its business. In a lengthy statement released Tuesday morning, Warner Brothers Discovery said that it was considering a variety of deals, including a sale of the entire company or a spin-off of some of its assets, in response to interest from possible buyers. While we aren't going to get into the specifics of who has expressed interest, it is safe to assume it is multiple parties, the statement said. In June, Warner Brothers said it would split its streaming and studios business from its cable networks business. The move aims to unshackle promising parts of the company, like the HBO Max streaming service, from the profitable but decaying cable networks like TNT and CNN. Paramount has expressed interest in acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery before that spin-off happens, hoping to scoop up the cable and streaming businesses in their entirety. Unlike other entertainment giants that are jettisoning their cable networks, Paramount is doubling down on traditional TV, which is still a major profit center. Executives at Warner Brothers Discovery expect the streaming business to be attractive to a variety of buyers, including tech companies like Netflix, Amazon, and Apple. Some analysts think that one or more of those companies could also jump in to bid on all of Warner Brothers Discovery because of Paramount's interest. This is a developing story. Please check back for updates.
All right, sorry, I stepped away. So we will definitely follow this. And again, it's this is next few articles are going to be more of more local or state interest. But man arrested inside Atlanta airport after making threats to shoot it up. I shoot it up. That's actually pretty funny. So that's CNN, but this looks like a video clip, which tends to be more interesting to people. So let's play this.
Breaking right now out of Atlanta, our Fox affiliate reports police have stopped a potential mass shooting at the busiest airport in America. Correspondent Madison Scarpina reports. She's live in Atlanta for us. Madison, what's up?
Hey, John. Yeah, we're getting all this information from Fox 5 Atlanta from sources inside the Atlanta Police Department. But we're learning that a convicted felon was allegedly planning to shoot up the Atlanta airport today, the world's busiest airport, armed with an AR-15. And that suspect reportedly did get inside the airport before police quickly stopped him. So here's a live look at Hartsfield-Jackson right now. And here's what we know. Our affiliate source says that this felon did a FaceTime call with family members, allegedly telling them his plans to shoot up the Atlanta airport. Someone reportedly notified police after that call. who then found the suspect's car outside of the airport. It was blocking traffic, but the suspect was not inside. Police reportedly did end up finding the felon inside of the airport. They grabbed him, took him into custody, and authorities reportedly found that AR-15 while searching his car. Our Fox affiliate is also reporting that they had a camera at the airport all morning. It was very busy, and nobody saw anything. So it seems this whole incident was kept pretty quiet, but we're hoping to learn more from APD very soon. There is a press conference scheduled for about 15 minutes from now, but obviously a lot of questions as to how this supposed convicted felon got his hands on that high-powered semi-automatic rifle. And this, of course, all happening during a government shutdown where airports nationwide are struggling to stay staffed. And if you know anything about the Atlanta airport, you know it's always busy regardless, even without that government shutdown. So back out here live, thankfully authorities reportedly did stop a potential horrific situation. But again, hoping to learn more from APD at the top of next hour, John.
Well, so again, Madison, they apprehended him inside the airport, but the weapon was not in his possession. It was still in the car.
That is what Fox 5 Atlanta's sources are telling them right now. The car was outside of the airport blocking traffic. He was not inside there. Thankfully, they did find the guy inside. But what we know right now is that there was not a gun on him inside of the airport. But as you know, during breaking news, things could change, and hopefully we'll learn more soon.
Well, thank God at the moment he didn't have the gun inside the airport. Madison,
Yes.
thank you. We look forward to that.
All right. Well, and this is for the sake of be brave. This is the suspect. So that black fatigue is kind of lessening today. So let's read this article. It's fairly short. The AI will read it.
A Georgia man was arrested Monday morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport after allegedly threatening to open fire at one of the nation's busiest travel hubs. Atlanta police said 49-year-old Billy Joe Cagle faces charges including terroristic threats, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, criminal attempt to commit aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Cartersville police said Cagle's family alerted them after seeing him livestream on social media, saying he was heading to the airport to shoot it up. Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens praised the family and police response, saying 27 or more lives could have been lost today because an individual came into Hartsfield-Jackson, and after being reported coming out of Cartersville, Georgia, that had mental challenges. This individual,
Cartersville isn't
his
too
family
far
went to
from
the
me.
Cartersville police and shared with them what was going on, and they alerted APD, and the APD and airport were aware, and this crisis was averted. Man arrested with fully loaded AR-15 and knives
What? 15?
outside Palm Beach Airport frequented by Trump.
I'm sorry, that's another story. So let's move on here. So speaking of Georgia men, Georgia man arrested for allegedly shooting at North Carolina home after tearing down Trump banner. So it's happening on both sides. Texas man charged with terroristic threat against Charlie Kirk Vigil. What the fuck is up with these white men of late? They're just going a hog damn wild. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, talk about Trump and his popularity. And we'll loop in some No Kings protest stuff as well. So this map shows Donald Trump's approval rating in each state after 9 months. And there is actually a map down here, which I'm gonna let the story read, and then I'll come back to this map because it's not real clear, probably on a phone screen or even a computer screen. So let's do this.
9 months into his term, Donald Trump's approval ratings reveal a stark divide across the United States. The latest data from Civics shows that Trump remains strongest in traditionally conservative states in the West and South, where he achieved decisive electoral victories while facing deep unpopularity in Democratic-leaning states. Meanwhile, in the swing states, Trump's approval is generally underwater ahead of the 2026 midterms. Why it matters? The data highlights how sharply divided the country remains and suggests that, even after winning the 2024 election, Trump faces persistent challenges in broadening his appeal. In swing states, where his approval is only...
And just for everybody, just as a visual cue, the bluer the state, oddly enough, I don't know why they did this, but the bluer the state, the higher Trump's approval. So someplace like Wyoming, it's like Wyoming is the most Trumpy state in the union right now. His net approval is 34%. Somewhere like Vermont, Trump is his Trump's disapproval or his net approval is negative 48. So you go from like negative 48 to plus 31. That's how divided America is. And then the beige looking states, Trump is slightly underwater. He's negative in these even places like Georgia. So that's the
slightly
visual
below
cue.
50%. His ability to maintain political momentum could influence legislative priorities, party strategy, and the positioning of potential challengers. What to know? In traditionally conservative states, Trump remains strongly supported. Wyoming leads with 65% approval, 31% disapproval, and a net approval of plus 34. West Virginia follows at 61% approve, 33% disapprove, plus 28, while North Dakota, Idaho, and Montana also maintain net approvals above plus 20.
I was wrong, y'all. I was wrong about something yesterday, and I want to correct the record on that. I said there wasn't no violence at the No Kings protest, except for Krasnov, Donald F. and Trump, firing mortar rounds from ships into the United States, over the Californias, over the protesters. Because nothing says I'm not a king like firing mortar rounds into the United States as some sort of warning to people, hey, don't protest me because I'm trying to be a king, winking and nod. Anyway, I said that was the only violence that went on. It wasn't, y'all, and that's where I was wrong. There was a lot more attempted violence too. 22 people got arrested. At least 22 people got arrested while 8 million people were out there protesting. 22 got arrested. All MAGA, by the way, all Team Taco, by the way, all fake ass patriots, by the way, got arrested out there for trying to stir up some violence is what happened. And I know why, Team Taco, that y'all did that. It was because you want to make the left look violent so bad, and you see that they're just peacefully protesting. So you're like, we need to stir some stuff up over here, because all of our lies about them being the violent left ain't coming true, because we know it ain't true. So we have to stir it all up, just like you did during the BLM protest. There was lots of you arrested then too for setting buildings on fires and stuff like that and trying to blame it on BLM. Yeah. You seem to want to forget about all that. Y'all were the ones instigating all the violence that you complain about now. You did that. But anyway, it was all done by y'all. At least 22 people arrested out there. Hey, did you see the one dude that tried to get violent? And even God said, hey, I don't like you doing that to these peaceful protesters. Don't do that. And then the sidewalk got pissed off, jumped up, and punched the dude in the face. Yeah, that happened. So he tried to be violent, and the sidewalk beat his ass, So anyway, that happened. And then in the North Carolinas, a woman pulled up and decided to pull a gun on a bunch of peaceful protesters, And God was looking after her too, because there was at least one person in that crowd, a good guy with a gun. I guarantee there was one out there in that crowd, and he used restraint. He used some of his leftist tolerance on her and said, I won't put one in her dome because obviously the lady has mental problems. So he just let the authorities take care of her and haul her off in handcuffs. So anyway, there was a lot of violence or attempted violence going on, all by you, Team Taco, all by you, every damn one. And then Donald F. and Trump tried to display some violence by dumping sewage on people there in his AI video while he was pretending to be a king at a No Kings protest. So there was a lot of violence or attempted violence going on, all by you, Team Taco, every damn bit of it, all by you. And 8 million people were able to go out there and protest and not be violent. And guess what else they did? This will blow your mind there, MAGA. They cleaned up all their garbage and stuff. In 2,500 different cities, they didn't leave a giant mess behind after they got done protesting. 8 million strong or so. They picked up all their garbage. And in contrast, do you remember whenever y'all went up there to the Capitol? You did the opposite. You tried to destroy the place. Remember, you busted the windows out. You beat up 140 cops. You smeared doo-doo on the walls of the Capitol. You took down the American flag and raised up the Trump flag. You desecrated the whole damn city.
There you go, Fred.
In the name of patriotism, Anyway, y'all don't know how to do. Did you see what y'all did there in the Arizonas whenever you had that coronation for that Erica Kirk lady? You left garbage all over the damn place over there. Left garbage all over, just trashed the place, So anyway, 8 million people went out there. They protested peacefully. No arrest made on any of them. They picked up their trash, and 22 of y'all got arrested, and you weren't even invited to the party, So anyway, there, Team Taco, I just wanted to point that out. I was wrong about that. There was violence, and every damn bit of it came from you. Okay, now while these people are out there doing the No Kings, I also saw y'all say, why are these people out there protesting against the king? Donald F. and Trump ain't a king. They ain't making no sense. No, it's because you are doing what I call tactical stupidity, being dumb on purpose, acting stupid, saying stupid things because you know exactly why these people are out there protesting. It ain't that he is a king.
Hey, by the way, just to clown some folks, I've noticed since this video is playing, I never have high numbers to begin with. So, I never expect high numbers. But half my low numbers left once this video started playing. And I can't help but chuckle. It's like as soon as MAGA starts coming under fire with facts, they kind of melt away. Maybe they'll reconstitute later. Is this like throwing water on the Wicked Witch of the West?
It's that he's trying to make himself one, and they're saying we ain't going to allow that bullshit in here in America. That's what they're saying, and you know that's what they're saying. So anyway, Mr. Not Being a King, while he's taking people's food stamps away from them because of the government shutdown, that is 1,000% his fault. Look, I've seen a bunch of y'all out there on social medias already this morning saying this is a good thing. We're going to take $100 billion worth of food money out of circulation. Our groceries are going to be cheaper now because of that. So essentially what you're saying there, Team Taco, is, well, you know what? Starving a bunch of kids is going to make our groceries cheaper, and we're going to celebrate that. So you're a bunch of damn people out there saying, I can afford my groceries, although they might be expensive, but my groceries are going to be cheaper at the expense of a bunch of kids going hungry, and you're celebrating that. Well, here's the thing there. One thing, that's called being sadistic. Yes, it is. You can look it up in the dictionaries. It's free. It's on the interweb. Sadistic. That means that you are gaining pleasure by causing someone else some pain, is what that is. So yeah, you're being sadistic. And secondly on that ain't the way it's going to work, dipshits. When these grocery stores notice that they're not getting the sales on these $100 billion worth of food stamps that they normally get, you know what they're going to do? They're going to raise their prices to recoup those losses. That's what they're going to do, dumbass. So anyway, while y'all out there celebrating kids starving, and which, by the way, mostly your kids, which don't make no damn sense to me. Why are you celebrating starving your own kids? I mean, this whole white Christian nationalist movement's about making more white babies. That's why they want to start marrying 12-year-old girls and forcing them to have babies. So it ain't making no sense. You're celebrating going out there starving your own damn kids because you can pay less at the grocery store while you starve your kids out there. Hey, you know, each to their own, I guess. But anyway, so while y'all were celebrating Krasnov starving a bunch of babies, you know what he's doing? Building himself a damn golden ballroom there, tearing down part of the White House, 100 and something years worth of history. Let's just tear that down so he can build a ballroom for himself that's 90,000 square feet that's going to dwarf the actual White House. Gaudy and gold, and I bet it's going to have a gold dome on it because, well, the reason why he was out there wandering around the roof of the White House a couple months back like a madman is because he was sizing it up to see if he could fit a gold dome on top of that to go with his new spray-painted gold Oval Office because, everything's got to be gold with his spray-painted gold toilets and his gold Qatarian jet that he, by the way, stole $1 billion from the Defense Department that was slated to be used to, fix our nuclear missile silos out there in the Midwest and stuff that's been sitting there rotting since the 1960s. Yeah, was going to use that $1 billion to fix all that stuff up. Now, he just transferred it over there to the Air Force so that they can go ahead and speed up the retrofitting of that golden F-Palace in the sky that he was given to by the Qatarian government. So it's all about the gold for him. He's surrounding himself by gold, wants to build himself a golden arch that he said is going to be for him when he was asked about it. So for somebody who says they're not a king, boy, he sure is trying to make Washington, D.C. look like it's all about him, the king, surrounding himself with gold while he's starving America's children and putting AI videos of himself dumping shit on this country. So anyway, Team Taco, I just wanted to remind you that, yeah, there was violence in this country, and every damn bit of it came from you and Donald F. and Trump, but somehow 8 million people were able to go out there and protest peacefully with not one single
What's
ounce
up,
of
Black
violence
Knight?
happening
Salute.
from them at all. So you can go F yourselves, all right? Inmate Trump.
Well, you know what? I enjoyed that. And the South is awesome. So this is going to be a little bit of a pushback from the New York Times, and I am going to play it. You will certainly get enough of artificial intelligence reading articles on my show because I get dry throat due to a medication or two. And plus, I just get bored. If it can be read by something else, why not? So anyway, everyone make sure you hit the like button. If you are new here, please subscribe to the show. We're actually trying to get monetized one of these days. And it is going to be slow going, I realize, because I'm just not all about that fuckery during the week. I'd be reading these articles anyway. So I figured, those who might be interested might, want to hear about some stuff in a little bit more of a less professional way, because I am not Good Morning America. So let's listen to this. Kind of a pushback to that positive take that Black.
The Rise of the Inflatable Chicken Resistance. This article is by Gary Steingart and read by an automated voice. On Saturday morning, after giving a reading at the University of Chicago, I decided to take a cab up to Grant Park to attend Chicago's No Kings March. The 2-hour demonstration took place beneath the city's downtown skyscrapers on a slightly overcast day. The city has been one of the focal points of President Trump's ire. There I met a middle-aged white woman in an inflatable shark costume. She held up a sign reading,
"What's up, SB?
This is
How
not
you
right
doing?"
or left, it is right or wrong. Senator Cory Booker. The shark costume had fierce-looking inflatable teeth, but the words on the placard were not going to rip anyone to shreds. Mr. Booker seemed a mild reference, given how poorly the Democrats as a whole have stood up to authoritarianism. The Shark Lady represented a part of the movement that drew inspiration from the people protesting immigration and customs enforcement dressed in silly inflatable costumes in Portland, Oregon. Wearing a shark costume while quoting a senator seemed sweet and suburban. Maybe that was the point of the silly costumes. It was a small island of old norms within a national emergency. There were a small number of scowling dudes bullhorning loudly about their love of communism, as the First Amendment entitles them to do. But most of the other Chicagoans exercised their right to amble on by in, for example, inflatable corn costumes, without so much as a nod in the dude's direction. This humorous form of protest, known as tactical frivolity, shows the absurdity of the charge that all the protesters are armed militants, in contravention of the Trump administration's claims that the protesters were all Hamas agents or Antifa interns. The protest in Chicago was wholesome, non-aggressive, and almost shockingly middle of the road. It's hard to call an inflatable chicken dangerous. Frivolity and absurdity are kryptonite to authoritarians who project the stern father archetype to their followers. Once the pants are lowered and the undies of the despot are glimpsed, there is no point of return. My dad's in the National Guard, and they're the people who are actually out to protect us, a 36-year-old woman dressed as a cowgirl riding an inflatable horse told me. She was bearing a sign that read, "No more cosplay cowboys." Of ICE, she said, "People without training are given authority just because they were bullied in high school and their dads never told them they loved them." I finally found a middle-aged man dressed as a frog, in homage to the most familiar of the inflatable costumes at the Portland protests. "We are middle of the road," he confirmed. "We're not cosmopolitan like New York. We're just regular folks who have had enough." He told me that the frog costume had been backordered on Amazon. They jacked up the price, he complained. "We got to thank Portland for that." He wore a red cape over his green body that read Amphifa. I stopped to get a free Nature Valley oat bar from a woman distributing them. "Thank you for bringing your kids here," one woman said to another. Indeed, the event seemed as family-friendly as a daycare. Every time anyone bumped into someone by accident, those hit were the ones to say sorry in their best Midwestern politesse. I met a lifelong Chicagoan in her 50s dressed as a giant green and yellow stalk of corn. She explained that the corn goes back to Obama and our vibrant Mexican community. Her sign read, "The tamale lady isn't a criminal, but the president is." The sign was a reference to Laura Murillo, a tamale vendor and beloved local fixture in Chicago who was arrested by ICE. "There's no one here who hasn't been at a bar late at night waiting for the tamale lady to show up," she said, gesturing at what might have been the biggest protest crowd I have seen in my life. And I have seen quite a few. "They're working-class people helping the community," she said of the tamale vendors. Many of the inflatable costumes I encountered were homages to popular culture that were previously unknown to me. The axolotl salamander is native to Mexico. A bearded, bespectacled, middle-aged man explained to me from within his inflatable costume, "He's on the endangered species list and on Minecraft. My daughter is obsessed with him." A woman who had emigrated from China 10 years ago was wearing a nun's costume and ringing a bell. She explained that the bell and costume were a nod to a Game of Thrones scene in which one of the main characters has to walk down a street naked while bells are rung, and the citizens of the city chant, "Shame, shame, shame." "ICE is messing up my community," she said, using stronger language. Her friend was wearing a green Power Rangers costume. The two attend cosplaying conventions together. Toward the end of the protest, around 2 p.m., I met two Jesus impersonators. "He's more classical, and I'm the more modern Jesus," one of the sons of God told me. He was wearing a crown of barbed wire instead of thorns, which is what made him more modern. "We want to present a mirror to our white brothers who were led astray," modern Jesus said. Of ICE's tactics, such as denying due process, he said, "This is not love of your neighbor." USA, 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 a chant went up around us. American flags, often hung or carried upside down to indicate distress, were everywhere, as were Mexican flags, often accompanied by signs. One read, "Raised by immigrants, the children of those who turn nothing into something." The flag of Chicago could be spotted just as often. After the parade, I met some Chicagoan friends I had made at the reading for a volley of Gibsons and Vespers at a bistro in the Loop. They guided me through some of the uniquely Chicagoan signs they had seen at the protest. "No Chicago handshake for you," a sign addressed to the federal forces terrorizing the city read. My new friends explained that the Chicago handshake was a frightening-sounding combination of Swedish-style Malort liqueur, a Chicago specialty, and old-style beer, also popular in the city. A man dressed as a Chicago hot dog carried a sign reading, "Chicago says no ketchup, no kings." I left the parade full of the pleasure of being a part of a vast humanity. It's a feeling that may soon be extinguished if we do not exercise our power of free assembly and free speech. The people of Chicago showed up in vast numbers. They demonstrated their love of country, their love of a particular handshake drinking, tamale eating, mostly mild-mannered, ketchup shunning place, and they demonstrated what one version of unity against oppression can look like. What is happening to us is as serious as a guillotine. We must harness our best creative, humorous, and frivolous selves in order to keep it from falling. Gary Steingart is the author of a memoir and Vera, or Faith, and other novels.
Well, I think the point he makes is that I think in the end, slowly but surely, how horrible some of these people in MAGA are. I think the base level analysis of MAGA is cruelty is the point. Until you do what I want you to do, we're going to cause you pain. And most Americans aren't like that. Most Americans, if you bump into each other, you go, "Excuse me." And I think MAGA, I actually would say MAGA is ghetto. If you bump into a MAGA person, the first thing he's going to look at, or she, is, are you black or white? And then it kind of, spirals out of control from there. So this is something else that caught my attention. Let's see. I thought I brought this up. God damn it. I am getting old. Give me one sec here. Because there was a take on ICE that was really interesting. And it came from I guess this lady's Hispanic.
So if you're
This is
too
from Dennis
scared
Sperling.
to come outside, fine.
Oh, well, let me start it
you
over. I started watching it and oops. Yeah, let's skip all that.
exhausting and it is dangerous. And freedom has never been won from the comfort of a couch. I hope that besides getting on your platform and yelling that we're not coming outside, that you're doing other things to help, like boycotting, mutual aid, grassroots organizing, and you're using your platform to encourage others.
Well, you know what? I was going to make a comment, but let's just watch this through. And it is literally, this woman explains or like highlights why blacks aren't coming to the rescue.
To do the same thing, but make sure you're doing something and stop acting like your apathy is activism. We are not our ancestors. I used to hate that saying because it's disrespectful, but now I get it because our ancestors were brave. They were built different. And some of y'all are built like your ancestors because a lot of y'all had cowards for ancestors. And it shows. My ancestors were way too badass. I already know that I do not measure up, even though I practically.
She said our ancestors were cowards and her ancestors were badass. I want you to keep, she's talking about our foundational Black American ancestors. I want you to, Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, all of them. Keep going.
Live outside, but we are living through our government being taken over. Hiding in fear won't save you and has never won a battle, and it will not win you your freedom either. So if you're too scared to come outside, fine. We heard you the first 50 times you said it. Cool, stay inside because the rest of us are working. But I will say that I believe that the people who put us in this mess
The rest of us are
need to
working?
be on the front lines. Latinos for Trump, Black MAGA, farmers for Trump, and of course, privileged white folks always ready to play savior, never ready to save themselves.
All righty. So let's have a conversation real quick. Okay. I want to direct this
Fred
to the lady
Sperling's
right
a lawyer, right?
Let me make something crystal clear. I want every word to sting where it needs to. Don't you ever.
See, I love this. Dude,
In your
this
whole
dude is
life.
awesome. Dennis Sperling, folks. He wants every word to sting. Oh, I love that.
Call our ancestors cowards. The fact that I even have to say this tells me how far removed some of y'all are from reality. How quick some people are to enjoy the privileges purchased with our blood and are bold enough to spit on the graves of the people who made our presence in this country possible. You said our ancestors were cowards because we're not in the streets protesting right now? No, they were strategists. They were strategic. They were survivors. They were warriors who fought the most powerful empire on earth with no army, no allies, no mercy shown to them, and still birthed a nation inside of a nightmare. Let's get something straight, ma'am. Your family wasn't hanging from trees in Mississippi. Your grandmother wasn't dragged through dirt roads in Alabama for daring to register to vote. Your great-grandfather wasn't whipped until his skin came off his back for teaching another man how to read. Black people in America didn't come from cowardice. We came from hell, and we built heaven out of it. Cowardice? No, cowardice is watching injustice happen and doing nothing unless it benefits you. Cowardice is staying silent when your voice could make a difference. Cowardice is hiding behind our courage while you enjoy the open doors we kick down. When your grandparents came to America, there were already Black soldiers buried under its soil. Black women had already been beaten, jailed, and firebombed so you could walk your ass freely in this country and open a business without whites only signs hanging over your head. You didn't protest for the right to immigrate here. Our people died for it. Every freedom you enjoy, every law that protects you is built on the bones of the same people you just disrespected. If my ancestors were cowards, you still be begging a white man for permission to enter this country. So keep your mouth shut. Matter of fact, keep your mouth off of us because we fought wars you never would have survived. We fought with faith when the world gave us nothing but despair. We fought with our hands, our minds, and our blood, while the same government that let your behind over here was lynching our people. You don't get to call our descendants Nat Turner and Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells and Soldier of Truth and Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King cowards. You don't get to talk down to the lineage of Black men and women who built this nation, brick by brick, under lash, under the gun, under constant threat of annihilation. We're not out in the streets because we learn from history. Because we understand that every time we bleed, someone else cashes in on the spectacle. We've matured past emotional reaction. We've evolved beyond performative protest. And most of all, we've outgrown the need to prove our bravery to anyone, especially you. So let me educate you. When you see us quiet, we're not scared, we're calculating. When you see us still, we're not frozen, we're focused. When you don't see us outside, it's because we're inside building power, financial, political, and generational. You see, we've spent 400 years fighting battles so other people could claim freedom. And we're done fighting on command. And this is damn sure not cowardice, it is wisdom. This is the evolution of a people who learn that the loudest fighter isn't always the one who wins. Sometimes it's the one who moves in silence, who waits for the right time and strikes with precision. So before you run your big fat mouth and call us cowards, remember who opened the door for you to speak freely. Remember whose struggle created the space you now occupy. And remember that we are the descendants of survivors, not spectators. You wouldn't lasted one damn generation in the world our ancestors endured. We didn't need validation from the descendants of bystanders. We're the descendants of the storm. We're the children of the ones who refused to die, who refused to bow, who refused to stop believing that freedom was worth fighting for. So the next time you think to call us cowards, understand the only reason you can speak that insult in English instead of your native land, your native tongue, and you can do it in America as opposed to in your native soil without chains on your wrists, is because our so-called cowardly ancestors built the stage you're standing on. Now go sit your ass down and show some respect, because while you talk, we build. And while you mock, we rise. And when this country shifts again, and it always does, don't be surprised when the same people you just called cowards are the ones standing while the dust settles. This is Uncle D. I love you all. And as I always say at this time, I'm out.
Dennis Burley Podcast. Hit the like button, subscribe.
Dude, I wish I could write a speech like that. I would have Dennis Sperling's following. So bottom line, this basically will go back to my point. I truly believe this. Black Americans, legacy Black Americans, we actually understand America for what it is, and we survived this long. So, so we go. So let's see, what else do we have here? Fred, I read Stacey Patton's Substack. I'll probably talk about it tonight. I wasn't going to talk about it at all, but it is worth exploring. So this is kind of a break before this next very long podcast. It'll be boring, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, best gumbo ever. I got to watch it. And I need to figure out, let's see, let's shrink this a little bit so we can get the full effect. You know, this is BS Dining Experiences, SC. It's an Instagram thing.
Different that I just created myself. You know, we did gumbo about a week or two ago, so kind of jazzed it up a little bit, made me an oxtail gumbo today.
Oxtail gumbo, wow.
We got some nice beef sausage inside there. We got some okra inside there. We got a few little soup beef bones inside there. And of course, we got the oxtails inside there. I got my cornbread right here. Got me a nice bed of rice. That's how we eating today. This was for dinner today.
God damn.
Now don't that look good right there? That's what we eating today. Oxtail gumbo. Put a little twist on it. See, you got the cornbread. I'm just put a little juice on the cornbread, have it socking it up. Sock it up a little bit. Ain't don't get no better than that right here.
Dude, I might be doing this.
Oxtail gumbo. The oxtails tender too. They tender. They tender. Meat just floating around inside the pot. Got a little okra in there. It is floating around. Ain't don't get no better than this right here. You better get you something right here. I'm out. I was coming.
All I have to say is I am hungry now. Damn. So this is called The Founders Never Meant to Give the President Unchecked Removal Powers, a conversation with Noah Rosenblum. He's a lawyer, I think at NYU. And anyway, this is going to bore. This is going to bore some folks, but I feel it's necessary. Therefore, I shall. So, everyone, please make sure you hit the like button. Please make sure, if you are new, subscribe. This is what I do, for better or for worse. I don't need the fuckery, at least not in the morning show. And by the way, this is still a show that's a work in progress. I will figure it out at some point, and I am very persistent because, you know, I have housework to do this afternoon. After this, we will cease for a few hours while I go, and you'll see what I plan on doing after this is over. But anyway, so we're going to start it. I'm going to throw over an overlay so it's not this boring looking Substack page here.
Welcome to the Reconstruction Agenda. I'm Andy Craig. At The Unpopulist, we do a lot of tracking the daily storm of assaults on freedom and democracy.
I don't know that it's wisdom
but
yet,
sometimes
but I
you
do
need to zoom
appreciate
out,
it.
take a breath, and look at the bigger picture. So every month, I'll sit down with people who actually know the terrain. Scholars,
And this is the dude who's
historians,
gonna be speaking.
experts, not just pundits with hot takes and opinions.
And I'll comment.
We'll explore
as
how we
go
got
along.
here and, more importantly, where we go next. In other words, a reconstruction of what's happened, a forensic analysis, but with an eye to rebuilding our institutions for the future. So the Constitution's text provides that the President shall appoint by and with the advice and consent of the Senate various officers.
And by the way, before we get into this, the Constitution, you know what? I am kind of somewhere between a classical liberal and a left liberal. I actually do believe in the Constitution, kind of in the spirit of a Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass kind of broke with people like William Lloyd Garrison, you know, white abolitionists. And I'm using the race for a particular point here. Black abolitionists like Frederick Douglass were a little different. A lot of white abolitionists thought that the Constitution was a, quote, slave document. And I tend to agree with them, by the way. I think the Constitution never was colorblind. Pretending that it's colorblind like a Clarence Thomas or a John Roberts, I think that is just trying to, put lipstick on a pig. However, I've always felt that Frederick Douglass felt that the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, was a freedom document. And there's the theory that, Frederick Douglass basically combined the Declaration of Independence onto, or grafted the Declaration of Independence onto the Constitution, the all men created equal part. So I realized what the Constitution was. My weird take on it is hold America to what the Constitution says. I do not think that originalists are actually originalists. They are more a political movement, a conservative political movement, in my opinion. So that's where I'm coming from in showing this.
And allows Congress to exempt some inferior officers within the executive branch from that requirement. But the Constitution is silent on who can fire them. That is, the removal power. So now we have a president whose catchphrase is, after all, you're fired, and he's putting that to the test. Emboldened by the Supreme Court, Trump has sought to fire, among others, a member of the Federal Trade Commission and a member of the Federal Reserve Board. But this hasn't always been how American government worked. There's a long history of Congress trying to constrain who the president can fire and under what circumstances, most often by requiring for-cause protections for certain quasi-independent agencies. So most recently, the Supreme Court has squarely taken up the issue of Trump's attempted firing of an FTC commissioner. Oral arguments are scheduled for later this year, in which the court might do what it has long hinted at, overturning the New Deal era case Humphrey's Executor, which also involved a president, in that case FDR, trying to fire an FTC commissioner over policy disagreements. But underlying Humphrey's is another little-known case that helped give us the modern supercharged presidency. That's Myers versus United States, a 1926 opinion written by Chief Justice William Howard Taft. You might remember from bar trivia as the only ex-president to serve on the court. As our guest has argued persuasively, Myers has a lot of problems. So to help unpack this issue, I'm happy to be joined today by Noah Rosenblum, Associate Professor of Law at New York University, specializing in constitutional law and legal history, including this exact question. Noah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Andy.
So, as usual with these things, we have to start in Philadelphia in 1787, where the text was unhelpfully silent. This seems like a pretty big oversight. So why does the Constitution, that has all these pretty detailed procedures about who can appoint various officers, not say anything about who can fire them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that constitutional theorists and legal historians have been debating for a very long time. My co-author on this article about Myers observed that based on the timing, it seems like they were probably ready to get out of Philadelphia. It was hot. They had been there a long time. They all wanted to get home. I think the thing we have to remember from where we are now is that when they were drafting the Constitution, they were putting together a document that was part of a culture that is just super different from the highly text-specific, lawyerly culture that we have subsequently developed. And the presidency is a particular site where those differences become apparent. So as people who listen to this podcast may know, up until pretty late in the Constitutional Convention, the election of the president was going to happen by the House of Representatives. And while James Wilson had, of course, proposed direct election of the president, he was roundly defeated. His suggestion was rejected. It was really important to people in Philadelphia that the president not be elected by the people. That was one of their key concerns, to prevent something like a demagogue. Meanwhile, when it came to what we now think of as the royal prerogative powers, those were apportioned differently across the different branches to different actors. Michael McConnell, the wonderful professor at Stanford, has written about this in his great book, The President Who Would Not Be King. So the way that the Constitution was assembled was a lot less, let's specify in specific textual detail the contents of 3 and only 3 branches, each with carefully defined powers. If they'd done that, it would obviously be super useful for the kind of legal separation of powers formalism that lawyers have to practice before the Supreme Court today. But that just wasn't what they thought they were trying to do. They were, in the famous phrase, creating a revolution in favor of government. They were trying to design a state that would be more efficacious than the Articles of Confederation. And there were a lot of different pieces to that. But even in their drafting process, we see that the specific words mattered a lot less than the general structure. So as I recall, they leave a ton of stuff to the Committee on Style after they've already made these decisions. And Gouverneur Morris, changes some things, which in ways that may or may not be significant, but certainly at the time were not understood to be fundamentally transformative, but that lawyers today put a lot of weight on, like, for example, the difference in the vesting clauses between the executive power clause and the legislative and judicial vesting clauses. So this is just a long way of saying the past is another country. That hot summer in Philadelphia looked very different from what we might expect or want from a constitutional convention. And my best guess, even though it's unsatisfying, is that they genuinely just forgot, that they just didn't think through the removal power question. They were rushing. They wanted to get out. And so just as you said, Andy, they clearly put a lot of thought into the appointments question. They also put a lot of thought into how much they wanted to specify about the structure of government. So the other thing that's totally missing from the Constitution, right? There's nothing about the removal power. There's also nothing about how the staff that's going to be working to run the government is supposed to look like. But we know that they knew that there would be staff, both because there is this reference that you made to the inferior officers. So clearly they didn't expect the president to do it all himself. And there's the bit where the president gets to request the opinion in writing from the principal officers in each department, even though, of course, there's not a single department specified in the Constitution. And to this day, we don't really know from the Constitution alone what makes somebody a principal officer. So they presumed all these things about how the government was going to work, but they just didn't leave it. And some of that, I guess now I'm getting carried away, but we know that when it comes to the administration, which they thought about including in the Constitution and then took out, that one of the reasons for taking it out was because they wanted to leave it to the regular political process to decide what the structure would look like, that they wanted the statutes to define what the departments would look like and what the officers would be. And so it stands to reason that one of the reasons they left the removal power out as well would be to let it be defined via the ordinary political process, that is to say, through statute. But now I'm getting into argument and away from historical fact.
Well, one other thing I want to make a point about, and Article 1 is the legislature. Article 2 is the presidency. In my opinion, there people who want the unitary executive, they are literally not originalists. They're not textualists. They literally aren't reading the text. And we would never be going through this moment had Biden or Kamala Harris been reelected. What they're doing, and I agree with Sugar Bum, who pointed out, they're aiming to stay. This whole point of, hey, let's go find some extra congressional districts so we can cement the power. It's too close in the House and even the Senate right now, but especially the House. Hey, we need more power. We need to be able to just basically overwhelm opposition, be it Democrat or otherwise. They're not reading the text. And yeah, technically the Supreme Court interprets the text, but the pretense that they are calling balls and strikes is bullshit.
Well, that's the necessary and proper clause, right? The congressional power for filling in all the details.
You got it.
But they did run into this problem themselves pretty quickly during the first Congress when they're doing all these things, when they're creating Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury and these first departments and everything. After George Washington has been elected president, the first members of Congress have been elected, but basically nothing else has spun up yet. So this has been remembered, and we'll get later to how the Supreme Court has interpreted this, but it's become known as what you call the so-called decision of 1789. What was the decision of 1789, and was it actually a decision at all?
You framed that perfectly. And I do just want to come back to this idea because it's such a fun moment to sit in. Just as you said, it's 1789, nothing's been spun up. All you have is a president and a legislature and this document. And the question you have to wrestle with is, well, what does this mean? How do you actually make a government work? So just as you suggested, one of the first things they do is create the main departments of government. And they get into a pickle over exactly what the statutes defining those offices should say. And so the big ones, state, treasury, and I guess Navy, one of the questions they start to ask themselves is, how explicit do we have to be about the kinds of power that the president has over this body? So let me tell you sort of how it comes down in the tradition, and then we can talk about what actually happened. So here's how people talk about it. They say, in designing the initial large departments of government, a question arose about whether it should be specified in statute that the president had the power to remove the secretaries of the departments or not. And the reason this became a question, nobody disagreed that they wanted the president to be able to remove the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Navy. But if it were specified by statute that the president could remove them, then it would appear that the power to remove was granted by the statute and not by the Constitution. Some argued to do this would be to deny that the Constitution gave the president a power of removal. And so their position was that there should be no mention in statute of the ability to remove. Rather, the statute should just reference what would happen if the secretary were removed. And this would in turn make it clear that the Congress believed that the president had the power to remove the secretary directly from the Constitution without having to rely on an additional grant of statutory authority. According to the standard story, these two factions faced off. There were a series of complicated votes, but the meaning of those votes was ultimately that Congress accepted the position that the Constitution gave the president this power to remove, and that decision taken in 1789 came to be respected by all the other branches, liquidated the Constitution's meaning, or reflected the Constitution's original meaning, since there were so many people in the first Congress who had also been part of the drafting and ratification process. And so the decision of 1789 establishes that even though the Constitution doesn't say anything about the removal power, it should be read to give the power the president to remove at least the heads of department. So that's the standard story. What actually happened? When you dig into the votes, it just gets weird. So the first thing to stress is that nobody thought that this question was going to emerge. And that's not my opinion. I'm actually not a historian of the early republic. That's the conclusion that my friend Jonathan Gnapp, who's got to be the most impressive historian of the early republic of my generation. He teaches at Stanford Law School. He's written an amazing book called Second Creation, which looks at the way in which the officials, especially the representatives of this new government, worked out the meaning of the Constitution. So back, Andy, to that kind of beautiful, complicated idea that being 1789 and having to spin up a government, and you get into tons of fights over the meaning of the Constitution. Jonathan's book unpacks those fights. I highly recommend it. He's also got a great article about this question in particular on the decision of 1789 in the American Journal of Legal History. And one of the points that he makes in that article is that from reading the debates, we see these representatives just stumbling in to this question. They didn't come in with firmly developed ideas. They changed their opinion over the course of the debates. They have to discover that it's a question they haven't resolved. Then they realize that they think about it differently and argue over it. That doesn't mean that they might not have been resolving an important constitutional question. They were certainly debating one, but it gives the lie to the idea that the debate over this particular question was fundamentally different from the other kinds of debates that happened in the early Congress. And in particular emphasizes how uncertain and contingent it all was. Okay, point one. Point two, Jed Sugarman, a law professor and legal historian at BC Law, has gone through and reconstructed the debate in a tremendous amount of detail. And he wrote an article called The Indecisions of 1789, where he emphasizes the strategic ambiguity, because it's not as if there were two clean factions that faced off against each other. One of them saying, I believe that the Constitution gives the president the power to remove. The other side saying, no, it doesn't. Only the statute does. And then there was one single vote and you voted up and down and the constitutionalists won. That's sometimes how people talk about it, but that's not at all what happened. You had at least 3 factions, maybe more. And they didn't come right out and say what they believed. You have to sort of reconstruct what their views were based on the little snippets that they give. It's clear that there was a range of positions on offer about the relationship between the Constitution and statutory power with respect to removal. And there wasn't one vote. There were 2 votes on 2 different provisions, and they were structured in such a way that it makes it very difficult to understand what any individual might have believed based on how they voted. You had different majorities that carried in each of the votes. As I recall, one of the votes is for whether the statute should say that the president can remove. So that would be the sort of statutory grant. And then there's another bit that has to do with what happens or something like that. Jed's article is wonderful. It's in the Penn Law Review. I can't recommend it enough, especially if you're an early Republic nerd. But I come away from that article persuaded that it is very difficult to make any clear meaning out of this sequence of votes. Now, that, of course, hasn't stopped people from trying to do so, although the reasons they rely on this early Republic decision have changed over time. So some people have cited it on the grounds that because there were so many people in the first Congress who were part of the ratification process, it gives us privileged insight into the original meaning of the Constitution. 2 problems with that argument are that, first, they haven't gone through. There were people who were in the early ratification debates, in that early founding moment on both sides of this debate. So there's no conclusion there if what you're trying to look for is a settled meaning. And of course, people change their mind on this question. So Alexander Hamilton, when he's writing the Federalist Papers, says, well, of course, the president can remove, but given that removal tends to follow the same process as appointment, if someone has been appointed with confirmation of the Senate, then you have to get the concurrence of the Senate to remove them. That's what he writes in the Federalist Paper in response to anti-federalists who are worried that this new Constitution is giving the president too much power. But then, of course, when Alexander Hamilton is in Washington's government, he changes his mind and he writes a letter saying, now that I'm actually here, I think maybe the president should be able to fire you without having to go through the Senate. So if your goal is to use it as an indicator of original meaning, it's very hard because they're not all on the same side and they change their mind. So what meaning do we make of that? Other people, and I guess this points us towards Taft, rely on it as a decision that others come to rely on and accept. And that's a very different kind of argument. That's an argument from acquiescence, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Lots of fun parliamentary procedure ambiguity. I sometimes wonder if folks who've done this have never had the blessing of being in a deliberative body trying to pass motions and amendments, and it's never quite as definitive as the final result might give you the impression.
As a fellow Robert's Rules of Order nerd, I appreciate your intervention.
So let's leave our Delphic Oracle founding fathers behind and skip forward a few decades, because kind of the next big development in this historical story was during Reconstruction and the aftermath of the Civil War. We could do a whole show on just this whole incident, but the short version is Andrew Johnson is president after Abraham Lincoln has been assassinated. And Andrew Johnson is, frankly, an extremely racist president in a lot of ways. He was not good on wanting to have an aggressive Reconstruction, defending the rights of freedmen in the South, removing the ex-Confederates from power and all that sort of stuff. Congress was in the hands of the Republicans, particularly the more radical Republicans. And so at this point, half the country or thereabouts was under military occupation. The southern state governments were being run by the Army for the time being. And so Congress passed this thing called the Tenure of Office Act, saying Johnson could not fire a wide range of officers, but most relevant was the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, who was in charge of the Army, and so thus administering Reconstruction without the consent of the Senate. Johnson did so. There's some great scenes where Stanton barricades himself in his office. If you've seen the recent series Manhunt about the aftermath of the assassination of Lincoln, they show this in a scene at the end. I highly recommend it. Johnson was impeached over this, first president to be impeached, and then he was acquitted by 1 vote. This has often kind of been remembered as, oh, the fight wasn't really about the tenure of office. That was some technicality. That was a pretext. It was really all this other stuff about Reconstruction, and the Tenure of Office Act was unconstitutional. I mean, that's the version I heard in high school when we were doing this in American history. But I take it they were not that disingenuous. There was a serious principle at stake here that the Republicans in Congress really did believe they had the power to set this restriction.
Absolutely. As you've alluded to, there were so many problems with Andrew Johnson. He was also an alcoholic and he was quite explosive. Now, the president's war-making powers have been so aggrandized that it's difficult for us to remember just how central Congress was to the Civil War. So even though Lincoln, of course, was this, I don't know if it's going to come up on the video, but I have this bust of Abraham Lincoln in my office. He's an almost larger than life figure, right? Lincoln is working incredibly closely with Congress in prosecuting the war. There's a committee of Congress that's deeply involved there. He's anxious that they're constantly looking over his shoulder. And that captures the sense in which the 19th century state really was a legislature-dominated state. This is going to remain true, especially afterwards. So when Johnson is trying to get around the legislature, it's a real threat and what's understood to be a real attack on the constitutional order, not just the new birth of freedom that the radical Republicans are pushing, although obviously that too, but a tremendous disrespect for what is, after all, the first branch, which is the one with the power. So when he ignores the Tenure in Office Act, he's not just coming up with a way to implement his will on Reconstruction in violation of Congress, which is precisely what is at stake in the Tenure of Office Act, the reason why he wants Stanton removed. So the part of what Congress had done at the time, really what the statutes did, which Congress passed, is that they required the continued military occupation of the South to run through the Secretary of War. They didn't trust Andrew Johnson. They thought that he had broken with them over what the Civil War was for and meant. And so they wanted to make sure that actors who understood the meaning of the Civil War were in charge of the Reconstruction process. And in order to subvert Reconstruction, Johnson sought to violate the Tenure of Office Act. So just with respect to the high school story, the high school story isn't wrong, but the two are more deeply connected than one might imagine. The Tenure of Office Act is a tool that the radical Republicans are using to implement Reconstruction. And when Johnson violates it in order to do his own attempt at Reconstruction, the violating the act is part and parcel of trying to undo the new Reconstruction that the radical Republicans are pushing. So that's one part. But then the other part, which you're getting at, is that, of course, it also threatens Congress's ability to structure the government. And if you go all the way back to Ex parte Hennon, which is a 1920s case, the Supreme Court there says, well, yeah, removal power follows appointment power unless you vary it by constitution or by statute. So there's, by that point, just a long tradition of Congress being able to control through statute. So that is to say, right, Congress may write the law, but the president signs it. So this is dialogical. It's not just Congress against the president. It's the two working together to build out the government. But you can have statutes that specify term of years. There are statutes going back to the early 19th century in which Congress says, hey, you're going to have these people who serve in office for a given term of years, which is in some ways a limit on the president's power. When they pass the Tenure of Office Act, it's obviously quite an aggressive act, but they're doing it in the face of an aggressive president to protect their own prerogative and to realize, after all, a policy that 500,000 Americans died to try to bring into being. So it's a rightly really significant moment in American history and in the particular question of the removal power. What's interesting is that afterwards, despite questions about its constitutionality from early on, it remains on the books and in some critical ways has expanded. So throughout the second half of the 19th century, we have not only the Civilian Tenure of Office Act, but also military tenure of office acts. And that ends up being really important for the evolution of the jurisprudence. But the key point for us to keep in mind is that even though the Stanton removal is the one that's most dramatic, in the 1870s and 80s, you have these cases where you've got cadets in the Navy who the president would like to kick out of office. And you might expect that this is the high watermark. After all, the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. But for a variety of reasons we can get into, Congress had written a law. The statute said that these cadets enjoyed tenure in office, that they were in their positions and could not be removed from them. And the Supreme Court repeatedly backed the cadets against the government, against the executive branch. So much less controversial, a much more bread and butter legal conflict. The same principle as the principle involved in the dramatic fight over the Tenure of Office Act and Johnson's impeachment, but apparently completely run-of-the-mill law.
So that takes us kind of into the later 19th century after, like you said, the Tenure of Office Act was still on the books, even though Johnson had been acquitted. And we have all these other laws. In particular, a lot of this was kind of related to the spoils system, what we might less disparagingly call patronage, the ways in which the party machines of that era involved a lot of using government offices and positions. This was before we had certainly the modern civil service system, kind of towards the end of this period. Narrow initial versions of the civil service protections come in. But in particular, the plum pick that a lot of people had in mind, everybody wanted, if your guy won the Senate election or your guy won the presidential election, was to be in the post office, because that was one of the largest government agencies that existed in a time when there weren't a whole lot of very large government agencies.
Totally.
And so one of these laws that was passed, this was after Johnson, after the Tenure of Office Act, involved postmasters and giving them a set term and protections, and saying that they could, if I have this right, they could only be removed when the Senate confirmed a successor, is kind of the way it was structured. So if the president wanted to fire them, they have to nominate somebody else first. The Senate approves them, then they're the new postmaster for East Topeka or wherever. And this kind of brings us to Myers. So how did this case about firing a postmaster, and if I remember right, it's Oregon somewhere, end up becoming this constitutional landmark case?
As you've just suggested, in the second half of the 19th century, like I was saying, we do keep these Tenure of Office Acts on the books, but eventually they repeal them. There's also this important revision to the statutes in, is it 1878? I think I talk about this in the article. Once I knew it. But importantly, they rewrite all of the statutes just to codify it. And at the time, the Tenure of Office Act is on the books, but then they repeal it later and they don't totally harmonize the whole thing. There are all these errors. So by the time we get to the turn of the 20th century, it's confusing. But one thing is really clear, just as you said, the post office remains both a huge source of patronage, and the law is structured in a way to protect the people who are in it. And you sort of were alluding to this, but this is, I just want to underline this, that the protections, by getting the Senate involved, it's probably about upholding the patronage regime, because it means that before you appoint or remove a postman, you have to get the Senate to sign off on it. And the local, basically, it was a pretty standard story that if you ran a political machine, you would eventually get it to put you in the Senate. So a lot of the senators, especially on the East Coast, although actually also in the Mountain West, are the leaders of local patronage machines, for which the post office is a critical spot. In part because, just like you said, it's a huge number of people, but you also get to make deals to carry the mail. You get to subcontract out mail carrying routes, which can be extremely lucrative. So good old fashioned honest graft, as George Plunkett of Tammany Hall here in New York might have put it. Okay, so what happens in Myers? So Frank Myers is a postman in, I think, Portland, Oregon, and he gets the job the way that you get a standard patronage job. He managed some senator's campaign. Myers is a Democrat, which is convenient because he's nominated by Woodrow Wilson, also a Democrat. That's why he gets the job. But he clearly gets into fights with people and maybe he's part of his own rival political machine. It's not totally clear, but he must do something to offend whoever his powerful patrons are, because Woodrow Wilson decides that he's going to be removed. Although actually I should put a small asterisk there, because we can talk more about that. But basically the law at the time, just as you said, prevented the president from removing someone from a postmaster position without the concurrence of the Senate. And the way this usually worked is that the president wouldn't remove you and ask the Senate for permission. The president would just nominate someone new to the job. The Senate would confirm that new person, and the confirmation of the new person was understood to be the Senate's participation in the removal of the other person. And incidentally, this way of removing by appointing a new person is, I think, what the law means when it says that removal is an incident of appointment. So if you can appoint someone to a position, well, just by dint of doing so, you remove whoever was in the position before. So that to go back to your initial question, why didn't they say more about removal? That could also be part of it, that maybe the founders were just thinking, we don't have to specify removal because the easiest way to remove is just to appoint someone new to the same role. In any case, by the time that Myers' removal is being advanced, Woodrow Wilson has suffered a terrible stroke, and he's basically catatonic. This is well described in his biography. His wife, Edith Wilson, is essentially running the government. Woodrow Wilson's advisors are like, half his body
There's
doesn't
also
move. They're
really
sort of draping
good,
his body in different ways to
podcast,
suggest that he's still
podcast
more vital. Think like
series
Weekend at
about
Bernie's
the
kind of
story
thing.
of Woodrow Wilson.
And it's during that
Alice.
time that the order to remove Myers from his job as postmaster comes down. And to this day, we don't have a letter from Woodrow Wilson saying, Myers, you're removed, even though other presidential removals at that time do have the president's name in the letter signing it. So Myers is understandably confused, not that he's been fired, people get removed and replaced for patronage reasons all the time, but he believes that the law has been violated. And this is both because of the long history we were just talking about, and more practically, he writes to various senators that he knows, and he says, well, I want to plead my case. And the senators write back and say, yeah, you're right, and you'll get to plead your case because Wilson's going to have to nominate a new postman to get rid of you. We'll have to hold hearings, and when we hold hearings, we'll bring you in and you'll tell us why you shouldn't be removed. So Myers is getting geared up for what he understands to be an ordinary political patronage fight, and instead he just gets this letter saying, actually, there's not going to be a hearing. You're just kicked out. And so he sues. And he dies while the suit is in process. So ultimately, his estate carries on the suit. And by the time it gets to the Supreme Court, the political composition of America's elite has changed. And this gets us to William Howard Taft. So Taft is one of the giants of his era from a law perspective. He is beloved. He's popular. He's incredibly judicial. It's been remarked about Taft that his highest dream in life was to be a judge on the Supreme Court of the United States, not to be president. And in fact, when he becomes governor general of the Philippines and has to give up his appellate clerkship, he doesn't want to do it. Teddy Roosevelt, the Secretary of State, and his wife all have to say, you should do this. Don't just be on the sidelines. You're a young man, go seek out adventure. This just gives us some insight into how Taft is thinking. He's very deliberate. And when he's in Ohio before that, he's very much part of the reform Republicans. So the Democratic and Republican parties are transforming at the end of the 19th century because of the patronage dynamics, Andy, that you were describing. You get a bunch of, let's say, more elite, especially in the Republican Party, politicians who are just scandalized by the patronage corruption. And they want to clean things up. And they want to bring good government, expertise, order into government administration. Teddy Roosevelt is one of the exemplars of this, right? He's one of the civil service commissioners down in Washington before he becomes governor of New York. Actually, before he becomes police commissioner and eventually rises on his meteoric political career. Taft is involved in anti-patronage efforts back in Ohio before he enters into federal judicial service and eventually government work. So they're part of a whole movement of folks who are convinced that the old patronage world is bad, it's anti-democratic, it's corrupt, it's venal, and it needs to be changed and reformed. And the locus of that venality is, of course, these political machines controlled by these terrible senators. So when Taft is governor general of the Philippines, he gets to set up a government institution, a civil service, a well-functioning administration without having to worry about these dumb, corrupt political machines or legislatures intervening and trying to prevent him from doing what he wants. And this helps inform how he thinks government should work. There are a bunch of other tendencies at the same time that tend to lead a group of these elite reformers, especially Republicans, but not just Republicans, to become really suspicious of this legislature-led approach to government and to imagine that a better way of doing government, a more responsible way of doing government, is to give the president more power over the way administration works. So Woodrow Wilson is a great example because in his dissertation, when he writes Congressional Government. That dissertation book from 1888 is deeply critical of the legislative dominance, but there he seems to be pushing something like a return to federalism. He's not yet imagining presidential primacy. By the time he writes Constitutional Government, 30 years later, he says, oh, I've now realized that in fact, the way to do democracy is just to give the power to the president. And he says, the president can be as big a man as he can with the party behind him. Now, in Wilson's case, right, he's probably megalomaniacal. I've mentioned some books on the podcast already, but I'll mention one more. Patrick Weil, the madman in the White House, about Woodrow Wilson, does a wonderful job of detailing Woodrow Wilson's megalomania, his conviction that he was appointed by God to be the leader of the American people, the sense that he's a world historical figure. When the senators are threatened.
Well, as it turns out, as president of the United States, he is destined to be a world historical figure. However, if you know anything about Woodrow Wilson, virulent racist, he segregated the federal government. Dude is amazing.
Not to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, which of course they don't ratify the United States joining the League of Nations. Wilson wants to dismiss them and call for new elections, right? He's got this like very parliamentary vision in which I am the leader and you guys are accountable to me. Okay, obviously foreign to the Constitution, but that gives you, if Wilson's thinking that way, Teddy Roosevelt with a stewardship theory of government, Taft coming in this way that's much more careful and thoughtful and judicious, but part of a similar current, reforming government to make it more efficacious and accountable by concentrating powers in the hands of the president, informed in part by his experience as Governor General of the Philippines, whereas he later writes in Myers, he was able to see just how much you can get done if you don't have to worry about this kind of meddling interference from the legislature. And it's under those circumstances that he ends up writing the opinion that decides Frank Myers' case.
And so he writes a rather lengthy decision. He takes a long time to do it. And so if I understand this right, there had been these line of cases doing basically statutory interpretation. The pre-Myers law was, well, what did Congress mean to do? There wasn't a whole lot of challenging the idea that this was a question for Congress to decide. But with Myers, we get the kind of first appearance of this idea that, no, this is constitutional, that the Constitution, because the president has the executive vesting clause, he has to be in charge of everything in the executive branch. He has to have pretty much unfettered power to fire at will because they're his subordinates, and he can't really be in charge of them if he's not able to fire them effectively at will. This is also happening against the backdrop of the progressive era where the federal government is expanding. We're getting a lot more new regulatory agencies, new laws, antitrust enforcement, interstate commerce commission, all these sorts of things. And so then that's what Myers says. But then there's a little bit of a walking it back. Not even a full decade out, but in political times, things have changed a lot. So we get to the New Deal. Franklin Roosevelt has a very robust view of presidential power in a lot of ways. Certainly, I think in many ways, even beyond kind of the Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson vision of the presidency. Though I don't think he ever thought he could dissolve Congress. That's one I hadn't heard about Wilson. And so we get this case, Humphrey's Executor, in 1935, where he tried to fire pretty much exactly like is happening right now. A member of the Federal Trade Commission. The law says they can only be removed for cause, which is you're taking bribes or incompetent or not showing up to work or stuff like that. But Roosevelt tries to know, I just have policy disagreements. Another case where the guy actually died before. That's why it's Humphrey's Executor. And so what exactly is the rule that lays out? Because it seems like it's a little bit of a fudge, but it's been the backdrop against which kind of the entire, all these agencies we're familiar with now, the FTC, the SEC, the FCC, basically anything that has commission in the name is kind of building off of what was found in Humphreys.
You got it. So let me just say one last thing about Myers before we jump to Humphreys, which is just that I hope it comes across that I have a lot of warmth for Taft in particular. And even though Taft pushes this more presidentialist vision, he doesn't give up on the independence of the civil service or the importance of expertise. So the Myers opinion is just this really fascinating, complicated document that's got both strands in it. But you're absolutely right that at the time, the presidentialist strand is the one that people really focus on. And that's part of why when Roosevelt fires Commissioner Humphreys, he believes that he can get away with it. He's thinking, wait, I've got this Myers case on my side. It's going to support me, even though there's this statute that says I can only fire for cause. At the time, of course, Roosevelt was working closely with Congress, but many people believed that he was asserting too much power. He famously gives this speech where he says, don't worry, I'm not trying to be a dictator. Besides, I wouldn't be a very good dictator if I tried, which is not what you want to say when you're trying to reassure the public that you don't have dictatorial ambitions. And so when Humphreys is decided, certainly subsequent commentators read it through the lens of this anxiety about overweening presidential power. The ground of Humphreys is that there are certain positions that are quasi-legislative or quasi-judicial. And if you're in one of those positions, it's totally fine for a statute to prevent you from being removed by the president, even if it might appear on its face as if that's the kind of office a president should be able to control. Now, if you and I had been talking last year, I would have said, boy, quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial, what a fudge. What does that even mean? But over the course of the last year, a group of us have been doing some research into these terms. And it turns out that, in fact, they were terms of art, and we've just forgotten what they meant. So at the risk of mentioning more people for your listeners to go track down, there are two young scholars. One is at Yale. His name is Bo Bowman. And one is a fellow here at NYU with us, Nathaniel Donahue. And Nathaniel has a great blog post about this. Bo has an article. Nathaniel and I are writing an article together on this question. But it turns out that the terms quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial, they go back, just as you were saying, to these commissions, things like the Interstate Commerce Commission, and they trace back to municipal government. And it's clear that these terms are developed in the late 19th century to describe offices that exercise power under a statute, but that are not operating as alter egos of the head of the executive branch. They are Article 1 judges. They are commissions in charge of rate setting. They are cities that are enacting ordinances pursuant to state law, but pursuant to their own processes. So it's a way that the law developed for talking about offices that, unlike the postman, who is, in the late 19th century, an extension of the president insofar as they're part of this patronage apparatus. What are they doing? They're just exercising executive power. That's not, the court says, what the ICC is up to, or somebody setting rates for railroads. There, you're making a kind of expert-driven calculation. And ultimately, what the court decided in Humphreys was that the Federal Trade Commission, even though Roosevelt wanted to use it as a tool for realizing his policy, Roosevelt was like, I disagree with you, Humphreys, about how to do antitrust stuff, and I want to do it my way. The responsibility of the commissioners was not primarily to the president, the court said. It was to the statute. The statute told them what to do, and they were supposed to exercise their own judgment in implementing the statute. So the Humphreys case ends up saying quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial roles can be insulated from presidential removal. And that was understood to be, just as you said, a repudiation of Myers. Although there is this puzzle that I was trying to research this summer, I still haven't answered it. Myers is a case that's decided 6-3. Of the 6 judges in the majority in Myers, 4 are still on the court when Humphreys is decided 9 years later. And all 4 of those judges vote with the majority in Humphreys. So it does seem as if the judges in Myers did believe that Humphreys and Myers were compatible, even though you're totally right. We read it now as a repudiation. And that repudiation, maybe I'm getting ahead of our story again, but that's, what Antonin Scalia really holds on to in his dissent in Morrison, which is sort of the last chapter of how we get to today.
Yes, and that does bring us up to the next bit of this story, which is we went through the larger part of the 20th century, and Humphreys seemed to be relatively settled. There wasn't a whole lot of active dispute about this. All these commissions, presidents got their appointments, but they were staggered, and there was gradual turnover, and it wasn't a point of too terribly much contention until we get to Morrison. which was this case involving the independent counsel statute, where Congress had said for certain things involving, particularly when you're investigating the president himself or misconduct in the executive branch, we're going to have this independent special prosecutor, and the president can't just go fire them willy-nilly. This got challenged, and all of the Supreme Court justices said, no, that's fine, except one. But that one happened to be Antonin Scalia, who would go on to be more influential in a lot of ways on kind of the Roberts Court era and where we are now. So going back to Myers, as Scalia did, how did he kind of recast that into what we would now call today unitary executive theory?
So in his solo dissent,
there we go, unitary executive theory.
Morrison, Scalia says, look, the Constitution gives
the
president the executive power, which must mean all of the executive power. And so this statute that Congress drafted, the independent counsel statute, which creates a prosecutor who exercises executive power, but is not responsible to the president, that statute clearly violates this provision. You'll remember we talked about this at the beginning of our call. That provision, the was put there by Gouverneur Morris and the Committee on Style. It wasn't exactly the kind of thing that the convention debated, but now here it is 200 years later coming back, and Scalia is making it a real cornerstone of his argument. And he says, what's really happening in this case is that the majority, my colleagues, are ignoring the Constitution, relying on Humphrey's executor to repudiate the Myers case. But the Humphrey's executor case, he says, didn't grapple enough with Taft's excellent analysis in Myers. And then Scalia writes an essay called Originalism, the Lesser Evil. And that essay is really important. It's probably Scalia's first statement about this new methodology that he's pushing called originalism. And he says, when we read the Constitution, we got to look at its text. But it's not just like looking at the text of a statute, because we need to understand what it meant, which is what the people who wrote it intended when they did it. And that's a really challenging thing to do. But if you want to see how to do it, the person who did it best was William Howard Taft in Myers, where, according to Scalia, Taft looked at the meaning of these constitutional provisions, looked at the decision of 1789, and said, well, this tells us the original meaning of the Constitution. And the original meaning was that the president had this removal power. And this essay that Scalia writes, The Lesser Evil, is right after Morrison. So in this one moment, Scalia both writes the solo dissent in Morrison, saying, well, I've read the Constitution, and based on my reading of the Constitution, Taft was right in Myers, not the majority in Humphreys. In other words, it's not appropriate to insulate executive officers from presidential control. And then he writes a scholarly essay saying, look, it's not just that I look to Myers in this one case. I actually think Taft is showing us a method for how to decide cases. Now, I just have to point out, because I am a law professor, I think this misreads the Myers opinion. When Taft relies on the decision of 1789, it's not because he thinks it tells us what the original Constitution means. He doesn't say, oh, look, all these guys were founders. He says, this was an original construction, a new construction of the Constitution, but it came to be accepted by all the other branches. And in separation of powers, we should take seriously that notion of acquiescence. So I think Scalia misreads Taft's method. I also think Scalia misreads Myers. Scalia says the court in Humphreys just rejected the careful analysis in Myers. Taft wrote 60 pages. The Myers opinions, when you include the dissents, is like 300 pages. He worked on it for like 2 years. The Humphreys case is like 12 pages. And I was in the Supreme Court archives this summer. There's just no apparatus. It's not a hard case for them. Scalia looks at this and says, oh, look, they just dismissed it. They didn't take it seriously. But remember, a minute ago, I was telling you, of the 4 Myers judges left on the court in Humphreys, they all vote for the Humphreys majority. So clearly they don't think that they're breaking with their prior decision, or if they are, it doesn't bother them. So I think Scalia is mistaken. But joke's on me, because even though at the time Scalia writes a solo dissent, that solo dissent proves to be unbelievably influential. Scalia's law clerks, many of whom become law professors, draw from it. As Federalist Society judges get confirmed, they really cling to the dissent in Morrison as having been correct, even though the majority opinion in Morrison, Rehnquist, a very conservative judge, writes a wonderful little takedown of Scalia's dissent, saying, I don't know what's going on with my brother Scalia. He's trying to put more on the text than the words will bear. But this all comes to a head under the Roberts Court, where in a series of cases, starting with the Free Enterprise Fund case, the Roberts Court turns what had been a dissent in Morrison into the theory of the majority of the court. And that's where we are today. So the key of Scalia's Morrison dissent was, as my common law teacher taught me, you need a clever textual argument and a strong structural theory. And Scalia's Morrison dissent had both. The clever textual argument was the vesting clause, the take care clause. This means the president has to be responsible for running the government. But the powerful structural theory wasn't different from Taft's structural theory. It was the president is elected by the whole American people. The president represents the will of the nation. And to be a democratic power, we need the president to be able to control the government. Taft says that in Myers. Scalia says that in his dissent in Morrison. And John Roberts writes it into a majority opinion in Sela Law, decided just 5 years ago.
So there's a couple of ironies here. One is that as much as this is couched in originalism, I mean, it's kind of the wellspring of what...
You thought me calling you a troll was an insult? I probably used an adjective. You're actually a clever troll. I have no problems with trolls. It's the ones who are illiterate. A troll is not a... When I call someone a troll, if you're a bad troll, you're an asshole. If I just say, hey, he's a troll, could be a compliment. Never know.
Became the originalist revolution. It's very bad history. Like this idea, I mean, you see this in the dissents in Myers, and you see it in Rehnquist's criticism of Scalia, that in fact, there is this long history after 1789.
Dude,
in the antebellum era, through the Civil War.
Trolls are
19th
welcome
century,
here if you're funny
everywhere
and
except
clever.
these, maybe this 9-year period between Myers and Humphreys, where in fact Congress passed and presidents mostly acquiesced in this position that Congress actually does have the power to structure the government. But aside from the bad history angle, I want to zero in on kind of that structural argument, because I think that goes to kind of, well, why does this matter? I think it really is fundamental to how we got this kind of supercharged imperial presidency, as it's been called. The idea that the president is this unique tribune of the people, even though he's not actually directly elected nationwide. And even though that's kind of my understanding of how the framers would have talked about this, is that, well, no, actually Congress, and particularly the House of Representatives, are the representatives of the people. They're the ones much more local. They're the only ones required originally to be directly elected. And so that kind of brings us to the Trump era, which is, I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say he and a lot of people in the administration have been on kind of a purge mentality of people who are not willing to get on board with their policy agenda, including a lot of very legally questionable things they want to do. And so this has now brought us to this case that's currently pending for the Supreme Court, which is directly square on going to overturn, I mean, widely expected to. This is the way the question is presented, and reading the tea leaves, it's not been subtle what the Roberts Court has been building up to on this, that they're probably going to overturn Humphreys altogether. And where will that put us in this? Is that going to be a kind of Myers on steroids? Obviously, we don't have the opinion yet. We don't know exactly what they're going to say. And there's this weirdness about, no, the Federal Reserve is different. We're going to carve it out maybe. But if Humphreys is overturned as is expected, does this mean that essentially Congress has no power to provide any kind of tenure removal protections? There's no ability to have any independent agencies, unless you're an Article 3 judge or a member of Congress, the president's your boss and he can fire you whenever he wants.
So I would say the biggest challenge is uncertainty as opposed to absolute prohibition. So I think your analysis is exactly right. You're completely on point. And I think a real challenge for the Roberts Court has been that it's expanded presidential power so much, and it's given the presidency such protections from the rule of law, think about the immunity case, that it's hard to see how to reconcile the government they're imagining with the Constitution or with a president that is supposed to be under the law? So there's a huge question. If you overturn Humphreys, you make it more difficult to understand how to design institutions that involve some degree of insulation from the president. It might still be possible, and it's certainly the case that there are lots of actors in the government who I think most of us think should be insulated from presidential removal, even if we disagree about principal officers. So at the risk of dropping even more names, Chris Walker at Michigan, wonderful colleague. He's got a great article. He's got great co-authors too, Aaron Nielsen, Melissa Wasserman, but he's written a lot about adjudicators, and Emily Bremer at Notre Dame has done this too. The people inside the government who are basically like judges, even though they're not Article 3 judges, I think all of us would be weirded out if these administrative law judges are supposed to decide cases on the basis of a phone call from the president. And if they don't do what they're told, they'll be fired. Soviet justice was also known as telephone justice, right? I don't think any of us believe that the Constitution creates that. With Humphrey's executor on the books, it's easy to explain why officers like that can be independent. If you overturn Humphreys, you're going to need some sort of a new theory or new account. We might be able to develop one. There's another case after Humphreys called Wiener that relies on Humphreys, but that you might be able to rely on independent of Humphreys if you needed to. The key point, though, is that imagine you're a representative and you want to design an institution. Right now, you know what the rules are. And in fact, the rules have been basically the same for 120 years? If the Supreme Court steps in now and declares this unconstitutional, first,
one thing that always amazes me about MAGA in particular, in the statement, "Make America Great Again," they want to go back. It's almost like a Back to the Future thing. They want to go back and disrupt, dismantle, or just destroy some of the things that got us to this point. And you can't do that. It doesn't work. So distracted by the present that you want to go back and rebuild the present and present it as a future. It's almost like Star Trek.
You've got a whole bunch of institutions that might now be struck down and that Congress undoubtedly would have designed differently if you had just told them that the rules were different. So there's a little bit of sandbagging. That doesn't seem fair. And two, suppose you want to fix things going forward. Well, right now you just don't know where the lines are. And that's always a real challenge if you're a judge, is to communicate clearly where the lines are so that the other actors who are dependent on you, which is to say legislators and lower court judges, know what to do. For what it's worth, this is part of why the Fed exceptionalism thing makes a lot of us really uncomfortable, because the Federal Reserve is special, sure, but it's also just like one agency, man. There are a lot of agencies that regulate industries that are absolutely critical to the American economy. Would it be okay to create a, Securities and Exchange Commission to regulate stocks that was structured the same way as the Federal Reserve? And if it was, would that agency be able to benefit from the same kind of independent protections? In some ways, I think the court doesn't want to have to wrestle with that question. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to keep the independent Fed and protect the monetary supply, but also allow for strong presidentialism. But that's just not really how the law works, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Lawyers reason by analogy, and we want to know how the analogies are going to work. So having the judges say, don't worry, we're not going to threaten the Fed. Insofar as I have a 401k, that makes me sleep a little bit easier thinking, oh, good, well, they're not going to inflate all my money away. But insofar as I'm a lawyer, I start thinking, wait, that doesn't do me any good at all, because a good for one trip only exception doesn't actually provide any stability in administrative law.
Want to kind of have a more divided executive branch where we have more of these independent.
I'm going to stop this here, mainly because even I'm getting bored with it. Bottom line is, you either believe in a constitution and originalism or textualism, or you don't. And I'm not going to even say MAGA because most Trump voters don't even understand the Constitution. If they did, they'd be much more worried about what Trump is doing. As a Black American, America has gotten through worse. We'll weather Trump. We will have to see how we are. In a way, you can appreciate a MAGA movement or Trump. Who knows? They're gonna break down a bunch of stuff, and on the other side, there may be structures that need to be rebuilt, hopefully better. But in the end, and that's another thing. Maybe I'll tackle it second half of tomorrow's show. Populism is a problem. And historically it has been. And if I don't get around to talking about it this week, maybe not this Saturday, but the following Saturday, the way this show is evolving, maybe Saturday shows should be more about, longer streams to tackle specific problems with, folks who, it kind of goes back to what I'm going to say here. Everybody like the show. If you're new, subscribe to the show, test it out. If you don't like it, unsubscribe. And if you do like it, recommend it out. We're trying to at least get to a point to where the show can be monetized. But the one thing I can say, and this show, this channel has been a slow growing project. However, most of the people that come to this chat, I feel comfortable just bullshitting with. Yeah, it can get racy, it can get, into fuckery, but most of the people wander in who are kind of regular subscribers who show up. Dude, we just kind of, go back and forth, and but most are thoughtful, and I appreciate that. So support the host. The Sovereign Beer Fund will be open for this weekend show, and there will be fuckery on Saturday or Sunday. If I do a Sunday show, Sunday I'm trying to kind of, definitely have the option because that's kind of the day I get to read more. So bottom line is there will be effery because somebody's going to come up and, want to, I'm not against, doing a right standard rudder and changing course, but I at least want to start out seriously on Saturday. So let's move on. If anybody needs a link dropped, most of the links I used today are in the show notes. If anyone, needs a link immediately, let me know. I want to talk a little bit more about No Kings this weekend, which I don't even have strong feelings on, other than it's good to see, 1 million, or I think I heard the number is 7 million. Numbers are always kind of, up to open for questions, but there's nothing wrong with people. According to Black Boot, hey, most of the people who were arrested were not like old ladies or kids in costumes. They were all MAGA disruptors. He didn't call them that. I'm calling them disruptors. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about No Kings. A funny video at the end, and then we'll reconvene late afternoon or early evening, or if at all. Who knows? I may not, depending. So anyway, here we go. Let's take down this overlay. And I know it was boring, but I kind of can sit through and put my feet up on a desk and just listen to, the reasoning. Unfortunately, my brain is slow and boring and methodical. But anyway, Ted Sturmer. By the way, I have a lot of subscriptions. I subscribe. Well, I actually joined this channel. A couple other history related and a couple fuckery related YouTube channels. I have Substack subscriptions I pay for, newspaper subscriptions, couple magazines. So it actually, all the money that gets contributed to this show in support of the host, it doesn't all go for beer. I hope people understand that. It's not all. I think, and there are a couple more subscriptions I'll figure out how to get as well. But I'm kind of serious about, at least looking at some information, presenting it. People can think what they want to think about it, but at least I get to kind of present my take on it. And that's really all you can ask for as a content creator. So let's listen to Dr. Sturmer.
If you want to protest for visibility,
oops, let's turn up this
protest for
volume.
solidarity. That's great. It works for that. You want to protest to articulate grievance, to give it words. Invaluable from a resistance perspective. But is
yeah, absolutely. Remind me of that.
You down the road.
As a matter of fact, let me find it now.
What you do on a Saturday afternoon might
no.
We
can
do
the
it's
mahi
what you do on the
mahi
Monday morning
as
after,
the
and the
opening
Tuesday
video.
and the Wednesday that makes the difference between protest as a pressure
I'll
release.
just do it as the opening
protest
video.
as a
'Cause I
pressure
definitely
creator.
want to see it.
Resistance does the pressure creator, not the pressure release. You want to keep up that pressure once
Oh,
you
you
get
want to do it on this
Hey
stream?
folks, I'm Tad Sturmer. I'm an American scholar of resistance history and the author of A Resistance History of the United States. Yeah, and I'm in London this week. Here's
Okay,
what
well, I'll
abusive
make it
authority
first
loves
thing,
about protest
on
when
the,
it stays
on the
unfocused,
latest
when
stream
people
then.
don't
Because I do
pass
want
the
to see
next
it.
10 words test.
He's got more
when
balls
they don't
than me.
articulate clear grievances,
I need
they're
a bigger
focusing on
vote.
different targets. When there's no real strategy, all of that, because it's diffuse, ensures no direct action. Nothing clear and coherent can come of it. Protest becomes performance. It's cathartic for participants. It really does matter, but it's irrelevant to those who are abusing their authority. All public protests have
It'll
value.
be
A
around
lot of you have been talking about that.
4:35,
It enables
maybe
people to
even
voice
as late
grievance
as
together,
6 this
to feel less
evening.
alone, to do something.
Not
when they
earlier
don't know
than
what else to do
4:30,
because nobody else
and
is doing it.
not later than
It generates
say
visuals that
6:30.
spread solidarity. Other people see what you're doing and say, you know what, I might do that too. And most importantly, it signals to
Okay,
those
well,
abusing their
we'll
authority,
try
authority
for
that comes
6.
from the consent of the governed, by the way, that their path won't be clear or unimpeded or unquestioned. But there's a real question here from a resistance standpoint, which is about protest as part of the active refusal and pushback
Okay.
that forces
And by the
change,
way, let
change
me
the policy,
let me
change the
also
trajectory.
Hey Richard, enjoy, dude. It got down to 47 last night here. This is like the first time I've run the heat since since early last spring. Dude, I woke up and I was chilly. So enjoy your Florida. I also want to point out that this guy has a book coming out. I think it's in January, maybe later of next year, where he goes in and he examines resistance. Like the American Revolution was resistance to England. So he looks at all the times. I hope he looks at Nat Turner, some of the slave revolts, because there were a bunch of them that dude, there were hundreds of slave revolts that, you don't learn in history books. So anyway, we'll finish this out. A couple more videos. Actually, I think they're all videos after this. And then I'll close this out. In the last video, we'll explain what I don't want to do. And I might just procrastinate and do it tomorrow. But the last video will give you an idea of when you're. I would get my son to do it, but he's not here.
Not just addressing a particular
Make
grievance
my
in
son
the
do
moment, but dismantling the systems that enable abuse to repeat. The Montgomery bus boycott, lunch counter sit-ins, Pettus Bridge, March
Shit,
on
yeah, that
Washington. You might think
47
about those as
degrees was
individual
brisk.
protests that resulted in change, but none of them were that. They were persistent, sustained, tactical as part of a resistance movement. They were all aimed at broader structural change, enforcing the 14th and 15th Amendments, which they eventually got through the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts. And so it worked. Not completely, but enough to change things for 50 years. That was protest as part of a resistance process. But now look at protests that weren't. Much more recent American resistance moments that didn't become movements. The Women's March, Occupy, even the massive BLM protests in 2020, enormous turnouts, real rage, genuine grievance. Nobody can argue that. But ask yourself, what change followed? Some argy-bargy around reducing police budgets, and then it all comes back with a vengeance. Protest without the next step, without organization, without targeted pressure, without clear demands that force institutional adaptation, even transformation, just get obliterated. Everything just dissipates. Power will wait it out. The folks in charge, the Trump regime, will watch what you're doing on Saturday, post some snarky social media stuff, a dumb AI video, and then shut up until Monday. But that's also what makes the No Kings moment potentially different, what it could be. The question isn't whether people showed up last Saturday. It's whether they've identified what comes this week, whether there is a clear target, whether there's a demand that, if met, actually changes the structure, whether the calls to action build something that persists when the crowd goes home, something like what Rachel is doing at America Demands. Because that's the pattern in American resistance history. The protests that changed things didn't end when people left the streets. They continued in organized form, built parallel power, and forced those in authority to choose between meaningful concession and escalating confrontation. Strategic provocation is really what we're after. Make them pay attention. So when you see No Kings protest, or any protest, ask, is this where it ends, or is this where it starts? And that's why, for those of us studying resistance dynamics, any 3.5% of the population participation uprise matters much, much less than what those people actually do. Because protest is where resistance starts, right? People articulate the problem. By definition, it's where it begins. And that's why the freedom of assembly and freedom of petition are in the First Amendment. The Anti-Federalists, one of our first group of proper resistors, those ones who fought for the Bill of Rights, they understood this, that the path to opposition must stay protected from the authority that comes from the people in the first place. The right to petition, the right to assembly. But resistance can't end with articulation. Effective protest identifies allies. Not everyone at a protest shares the same grievance. They might just share anger, and that can be legit. But in order to go from there to a movement, there needs to be focus. There needs to be a meaningful target. There needs to be a strategy for change that comes from organized opposition. And that's the resistance proof. What the protest does in the moment, articulate grievance, identify allies, and what it does in the next moment, the call to action. That's where change can begin. The civil rights movement protests were tactical and targeted. Look at the March on Washington images, and this is a good test for any protest. Look at the pictures. Take a look at the signs. Not identical, but they were consistent. There was a strategic intent. You could tell what they were protesting for and what they were protesting against and what they wanted to do with it. Gen Z protests globally right now are fascinating. Take a look at them. Same thing. They are tactical. There is a focus to them. They are, in fact, toppling power. So, again, test any protest. Do you understand the grievance from the images? Do you know what the people want done? Can you identify clear calls to action? If you can't, it says a lot. And here's a crucial question and another test for you. Will the calls to action that are there, in best case outcomes, actually achieve the necessary change? Or are the protest leaders just establishment agents redirecting agency back into existing power structures? If your goal is change, and leaders are asking you to swap out one set of establishment figures for another set of establishment figures, is that enough? Will that solve the problem? Because if the problem is structural, swapping leaders ain't going to do it. It just perpetuates the problem. It's interesting to look at it from the standpoint of resistance history and American resistance history, because the template was laid down by the Patriot resistance from 1765 to 1775, not the American War for Independence. It's the resistance that made that possible. That was a masterclass in turning protest into organized opposition, parallel institutions, and finally targeted direct action that forces change. Henry David Thoreau saw that clearly in anti-slavery resistance that made the Civil War possible, that made the end of slavery possible, that conflict that had to happen. For decades, that protest movement had gotten hijacked by establishment voices arguing gradual reform, and that was acceptable to them, comfortable for their positions, while perpetuating horror for 4 million people, almost 20% of the population. This is the American way of resistance, making certain it matters when it matters. The push for change doesn't end when the protest does. The protest continues off the parade route, builds into organized opposition, and finally becomes direct action that forces change. Not just visibility, transformation.
Yeah, I look forward to this book coming out. So let's go and look at a little bit from this weekend. Ooh. The gun thing is going to be another tendril of American history that is going to be interesting. So let's see what this story is all about. Oh, by the way, look at this right here. King Kong, King Elvis, King Burger King. And then we get to Donald Trump, no fucking way. I found that funny.
Across the country in major cities and small towns, hundreds of thousands gathering at No Kings demonstrations, rallying against the Trump administration.
The rule of law is being destroyed.
Thousands of people taking over the
you could
streets
have
of
blown
downtown
that,
Chicago, many of them
that
motivated
outhouse down,
by
I
various
bet.
factors, but the common thread, their defiance against the Trump administration policies. Do you feel you've been profiled?
I absolutely, because how I look, I'm Mexican American, first generation, but I served 30 years in the military.
ICE is in our neighborhood, literally snatching people off the street.
No Kings organizers said more than 2,500 rallies were planned, with millions expected to participate. Huge crowds turning out in Boston, Miami, Buffalo, and more.
I'm 90 years old, and I've never seen my country in this condition.
What values are at the top of your mind as you protest today?
Are they really?
Access to abortion, pro-choice movement, LGBTQ plus rights.
Brian Chandler is on the ground in Austin.
Here in Austin, Governor Abbott mobilizing the National Guard to watch for any unrest as more than 10,000 peaceful protesters
gonna be our
march from the
next,
Texas Capitol.
One of the biggest protests happening in President Trump's backyard. Melanie Zanona is in D.C.
And organizers tell me over 200,000 people showed up for the rally near the National
Yeah, I
Mall.
can see she's
And one thing
AI.
top of mind for many here, the decimation of the federal workforce.
Scientist Bill Nye says that decimation leaves us all vulnerable.
Cutting the budget, especially to NASA, is thoughtless.
The demonstrations even spreading beyond the states with rallies overseas.
Not only us in the United States, but across the world. We're all in trouble.
President Trump and his administration addressed the No Kings movement this week.
They're referring to me as a king. I'm not a king.
Right. Obviously, everyone's letting the protest. It's what America's all about, is proving that there isn't a king, right?
Earlier this year, the White House posted an artistic image of Trump in a crown, writing, quote, "Long live the king." But today, thousands of protesters sending a message to the president.
Adrian joins me now. Adrian, there had been warnings from some Republicans that these protests could turn violent. What did you see today?
Jose, across the country, we saw large crowds, few incidents. Here in Chicago, protesters marched to Trump Tower, which is behind me. Police are still compiling data to determine how many people participated, but so far, no reported arrests. And in New York City, the NYPD says more than 100,000 people showed up, and the police there say they made 0 protest-related arrests. Jose?
All right. Well, let me show you something that is definitely AI. This came from Truth Social. Our personal president communication advice. Let's see here. Oops. Let me try. I'm sorry. I forgot to switch this over. So this is from Truth Social, and I know I enjoyed it. Yeah, you know what? That's a good idea. I know who Talarico is. I'll definitely add that to some stuff we need to watch. But that was this is on Truth Social. Trump is king, shitting on peaceful protesters. That kind of caught my attention, actually. So, and we have come to the last video, and this is what I'm gonna try and do. Unfortunately, housework beckons.
If your oven has a funky smell, produces smoke when you cook, or you simply have a lot of crud everywhere, it's probably time to clean it. If your oven has a self-cleaning feature, as this oven does, that can be a great option, but only if your oven is only slightly dirty. The self-cleaning function will use high temperatures, or sometimes even steam, depending on the model of the oven, to help incinerate or loosen crust and grease for an easy cleanup. However, if there is too much residue buildup, your oven's self-cleaning feature may not be able to handle it without potential risk of smoking, or worse, causing a fire. I'm going to walk you through how to clean your oven using baking soda and vinegar. Baking soda and vinegar will act as natural cleaning agents if you're concerned about using chemicals that may be potentially harmful to you or your stove. Even though the oven is black and it might be hard to see, there are some stains on the sides of the oven. The bottom can certainly use a good clean, and the racks have seen some better days. Before you get cleaning, be sure to read the owner's manual of your oven, and the labels of any cleaning products you may be considering ahead of time, to see what cleaning methods and products are right for your particular oven, and safe for you. For this method, you'll need baking soda, distilled white vinegar, a bucket, some paper towels, a spray bottle, a Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, a large bowl, an old pastry brush, and microfiber cloths. We're also going to wear some gloves and eye protection. Baking soda and vinegar could irritate your eyes or potentially irritate or dry out your skin. You'll find all the products that we used and recommend linked in the description below. So let's start by removing the racks and any other pans or accessories you may have stored in the oven, such as boiler pans or thermometers.
Yes.
Check your floor in front of your oven
Cleaning,
using some
house
paper towels or
cleaning.
newspaper. This will save your floor from any nasty drips or spills coming from the oven as you clean. I swept out any loose debris that was sitting on the bottom of the oven. Now it's time to make our cleaning paste. Combine 1 cup of baking soda and about 2 tablespoons of water in a bowl to create a spreadable paste. Feel free to eyeball and adjust your mixture for more or less water. Not too thick, not too thin. Just a consistency that is good for spreading and adhering to all the surfaces. My paste was too dry and powdery, so I added about 4 more tablespoons to get my consistency to where I wanted it. Use your pastry brush, or your hands if you want, to spread the paste on every surface in the oven. Just focus on a nice, even coating. Avoid things like electrical heating elements, gas vents, and light bulbs. Don't forget the door. And for this method, I'm going to close the door and wait 8 to 10 hours. For the racks, put them in a bathtub or large sink, and then spray them with distilled white vinegar. Then sprinkle them with dry baking soda. You'll notice the mixture will start to foam, which is a good sign. You'll know the reaction between the baking soda and vinegar is working, which acts as a powerful cleaner. You'll actually hear sizzling if you listen close, from the baking soda and vinegar interacting. Once the foaming stops, fill your tub or sink with hot water until the racks are completely covered. I didn't have a drain plug handy, so I tried a little do-it-yourself hack where you just put a rag in a plastic bag and shove it down there. It worked great. You can see how quickly the water turns a murky brown from all the grime coming off the racks. All right, so it's been 8 hours.
Some good
it's now
trees.
nighttime for me. The paste has hardened, and we're now going to take it off using a damp microfiber cloth so that you don't scratch anything. Use a bucket of warm water to rinse the cloth as you go. Here's where a little elbow grease comes in.
My oven
If there's any
isn't
leftover
that
grime
bad,
or residue from the
but
paste, spray some vinegar and use a little bit of baking soda to get that cleaning
basically
reaction
don't
going
want
again.
to do the
Let it
usual.
foam up and then scrub
What
with
is
a
it?
Mr. Clean
Easy
Magic
off
eraser,
that
which will
old
be a little
style.
more powerful than a cloth.
So, too bad my son's not here. Maybe I ought to invite him this weekend. There's a football game
I
apparently.
noticed some sort of dry streaking happening
Maybe
here when I
it'll
was
wait
rinsing
till
off
next
the mixture,
weekend, but
so I gave it a
I'll
few
at
more
least
rounds
get the
with a wet
first
cloth, refilling the
swipe
bucket
done.
with clean water each time. To finish cleaning the racks, drain the bathtub or sink, and wipe away any leftover grime with your microfiber cloth. You can see all the charred bits that flaked off at the bottom of my tub. Then dry your racks and put them back in. I was pleased with the results of cleaning with baking soda and vinegar. The oven is just overall a bit more shiny and sparkly. The bottom cleaned up well, and I was super impressed with how clean the racks got.
Now, one thing I don't really get, as long as the oven is working efficiently and it's not, super charred, hey, it's an oven. Doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to not be dangerous. So that is, I'm going to at least make some preps, and I got a couple other house cleaning things to do. So hopefully, Richard thinks 6 o'clock. Maybe I'll come on earlier, not much later than 6 p.m. this evening. So that is what's happening. I want to thank everyone, for dropping by. And as I've said, look, you people, look, it's a boring show. I'm not going to change it except in the direction that I think it needs to go. Saturday's a good day for fuckery. If the fuckery comes up organically, then we have fun with it. But I'm just not going to move in that direction. I'm uncomfortable with it. Mostly because, we shouldn't. So everyone subscribe, everyone like, everyone support your house cleaning host. Because boy, I don't want to do it. I should have had 10 children instead of one. This would be done in an afternoon. But I chose differently. So everyone, Dirty, Richard, Zhang, Slick, Fred, Zhang, I mentioned Zhang. And Brooklyn Watson, I wish she would come by more often. Yeti, Black Knight, CK, of course. Uncle Fatty showed up. So I thank you all. We will see you later today. And if I don't, I'll be back in the morning. A little fuckery isn't bad, but it should be dessert. The main thing to think about is where we are as a country, where we are as a government. To me, or even as families. If you want to get sociological about it, but Dirty, I've known you for quite some time, and that you are here. You're kind of a bellwether, to be honest. You and Fred, and you feel comfortable if I'm straying in a place I shouldn't go. Lupin Ragging, who's kind of my age peer, and we kind of tend to want to be analytical about stuff. he's another bellwether. So all I can say is I appreciate the folks who kind of hang with me, and I will see you all later.